For the inaugural episode of Season 4, I sit down with Kyle Kephart to discuss enterprise sales. We talk about why Copier sales is an important proving ground for salespeople, how it translates to enterprise sales, and how the entire sales process works. Kyle talked about how sales comp should be structured, executive pitfalls, how to report to the board, the right kinds of partnerships to go after, how to think about renewals, and much more. We also talk about the blame game between sales and marketing, how he thinks about product development, and lastly, how he stays motivated. With that, please meet Kyle Kephart. Hello and welcome to the RSnake Show. Today I have with me Kyle Kephart. How are you, sir?
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Especially after that sip of whiskey, I could light it on fire.
It's not 151, but it's pretty potent.
It tastes like it.
So today is episode 1 of season 4. You are our first guest of season 4. We made a couple of changes around the studio at Chris's behest. One of the pinnacle pieces here is this knight's helmet. It was actually on the show The Green Knight. I don't know. Have you seen that?
Mm-mm.
Oh, it's definitely worth watching.
That was like a King Arthur, that dude he fought. Can't even remember what his name was.
Lancelot? No.
Lancelot. I thought that was the Lancelot helmet.
No, but one kind of interesting story about it. My very good friend, our very good friend, JD Cameron, used to say I was a paladin. And so it kind of makes sense, weirdly, of all places. It's kind of front and center. So
Cool helmet.
Yeah. Well, you have to thank Chris. Thank you, Chris.
You're very welcome. Thanks, guys. You caught me off guard. Okay.
So what we are here today to talk to you about, sir, is sales. I hear you know things about sales.
I know some things about sales.
Yeah. Okay. So I'd like to start at the beginning because I think your entrance into sales is some of the funniest things. I mean, they really should make a movie out of just what it's like to be a copier salesman. So why don't you back us up and tell us a little bit about that?
Well, that actually wasn't the first sales job I had,
really?
but it was definitely the first sales job out of college. And I guess the history is I didn't know what I was selling when I signed up for the job. And that was the first kind of crux of everything. So if you can imagine.
It could have been knives. It could have been anything. Or?
Well, I knew what the company did. It's a major company, right? Huge company, like global, whatever, 500 company. And my cousins, some of those friends with my cousin basically got a recruiter that asked them for a job. I was looking for a job at the time. And I went in and interviewed and did well in the interview, not knowing what I was selling, but it was an imaging, right? So I'm selling imaging. There's all kinds of product lines, 6 or 7 product lines. So who knows what I'll be selling? Maybe all of them MRI machines. It could have been obviously production printers and copiers, or it could have been like lenses for cameras and things like that. So I basically signed up for this job, got told to stay a year, and then they flew me up to New Jersey. Go to New Jersey, land in Newark Airport, and a Cadillac picks me up. So I thought this is an awesome job, right?
Right.
Barely even knew what it paid, right? Didn't know how the commission structure worked. Didn't really care. I mean, this is just kind of me at the time. And go into this Cadillac, and we're going somewhere in New Jersey. I won't disclose company or anything,
Sure.
but somewhere in New Jersey. And start sales training, right? Pretty cool hotel room, right? Dinners, everything's kind of comped. And immediately I start trying to find a way to get one of my buddies up to New York City so that we can go downtown, grab some beers, do all that kind of stuff. And not really worried about the job. Now, day 2 of sales training, I figured out I'm selling copiers, right? Now they do a lot of stuff.
It took
right?
a whole day for them.
It took, well, you gotta think of who I am at the time, right?
Sure.
I'm maybe 23. I might've been 23. Don't really care about, what it is I'm selling. Not as much concerned with that. Just, trying to have a good time while I'm in New York. Right. So, it was day 2, and, it was a little disappointing to find that out. But there's long sales trainings, and it's kind of hyped up and everything. And there's homework and homework, right? Which is kind of really funny. Like when you're talking about adults and sales training, you actually have to go back to the hotel and like figure this out with your team and everything. But I mean, really good sales training, really good like trainers kind of talking about what it does, the sales process. So if you were ever new to sales, which I think I might have been one of the only 2 people that were new to sales. Some people were like, 55 coming over from a career in this. So obviously treated it a little different than I did. Probably didn't make a great impression. Just based on some things. Yeah.
Things in New York, late nights in New York.
Not as much of that, but being a little cavalier about maybe how difficult things were, right? I mean, I just came out of college, so like learning some material was pretty simple. And you're talking about like a 4-step process that I don't really need to go back to the hotel room and work out a lot of ideas for, like, press print, kind of easy, but there is a lot more than a copier, right? You got production printers. These things are like hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they do all kinds of stuff, but
basically they just copy.
Yeah. At the end of the day, that's what people are using.
And they print.
They print and they copy, right? Especially when you're getting into what the main, selling product was. So.
And so how did that go?
Well, good and bad, right? It is the best job of my life and the worst job of my life. So on the best side, we had the best sales guys in the world come from that industry, right? Best people I know still to this day are copier salesmen, or they have that, even in our industry, right? Even information security, IT, anything like that. And you walk into a job and you had at least a year or something doing that, they know a lot about you, right? And the people that did it successfully for longer than that are hands down the best salespeople.
And why is that?
Because it's very hard. It's incredibly hard. You don't get a lot of the tools, or you didn't at the time. You don't even know who you're supposed to be talking to, right? So you're trying to figure that out, and you're walking into offices at the time, which is, a main way to generate leads. And you have to navigate that really well. And you have to get past like multiple gatekeepers just to figure out who you're going to talk to, right? Just to figure out the buyer. So you have to be incredibly smooth. So when you talk about the people that are good, like some of the people I got paired up and learned with, they are so good. They make it look so easy. And it all seems easy until, you walk through the door and everyone just wants to give you the middle finger or point to the sign.
What are you doing here?
What are you doing? Oh, yeah, you're the 5th guy in here today trying to sell us something we already have. Not to mention the brand you have is OEM'd among these 5 distributors that are all also kind of trying to sell this.
Basically already have your printer.
Yes, everyone has one, right? Everyone has this stuff. They all do the same thing. The differentiators are something.
So how do you do that? How do you do the differentiators?
It's not about the differentiators, right? Is the first thing you kind of have to understand. It's at some level, it's a relationship sale, and then it's contract restructuring, right? So most of these things are leased, and despite kind of what people buying these know how expensive it is and know how expensive the maintenance on it is. It's almost like buying like a fleet of cars with maintenance, and you have to continue to buy these. So it's much more complex, and that's why people don't want to go redo these contracts, because the salespeople are incredibly good, so they can create these contracts that are very hard to understand, right? And these lease formats that are compounding on each other, especially if you're going to refresh something early, and you're talking about 5, 6, 7 of these, or these huge production printers which people build their entire business off of, and you're talking about millions upon millions of dollars, and that may be one of their main expenses. So when you go into it, you kind of have to know first if the contract's going to be up. It's a commodity, right? So is the contract coming up, and when is it coming up? Because it's not so much one of those strategic sales where you need to be engaged years ahead necessarily. It's good to be, but not necessary. And then you want to throw a lot of resources once you get there, structure it, price it the right way. The fundamentals of sales have to be very well put together when it comes to that. But even more so, there's kind of a nonchalant behavior that works pretty well. If you
how do you even get past the gatekeepers in the first place?
Yeah.
I mean, there's locked doors. There's people between you and them.
So there's a lot of people that have been doing this for a long time. First, you kind of have to develop a relaxed kind of format. Like, so when you're in there, you have to be good with just like openings and small talk that's lightly fun, kind of funny. And you can't be so intense where you are going to sell this by the end of the day and you want to do this. You have to know the right questions, kind of open people up. And you have to be someone they want to do business with, right? And a lot of these gatekeepers just see the same things over and over. These small businesses or even large businesses, they're not supposed to be giving out information. Of course, this is a different time because everyone has all this contact information now. At the time, they didn't. So you have to open well. You have to not really care about the result of it and just say that is just one business among, the next 50 you'll go to, and that person's opinion of a salesperson doesn't really matter, right?
It's a numbers game.
It is. It definitely is a numbers game, and you'll find yourself in the right place.
But it's not just that. If it was just that, I think anyone could play this game. But you also have to be kind of cunning. You actually have to work the angles and literally sneak through alleyways and through back doors and whatever.
You'll find you get kicked out of offices, right? Office buildings. A lot of people left within their first 3 months, right? Left crying. It will take any sense of ego straight out of you because you can be whatever in college or after college and you have a lot of friends and you can be who you feel is important, but nobody cares about you or any of this in these businesses just kind of struggling. I graduated right after 2008 recession, right? So they don't care about you or who you think you are, right? It's just what you can do for them, right? And even to get to that point, you have to do a lot of work, right? And that just gets you in the right position. And then you basically start your selling from there.
Mm-hmm. Which includes literally sneaking through doorways.
I cannot talk too much about that, right? Obviously. But yeah, I mean, the same, security things pen testers do. I didn't even know that was a thing.
I know, it's definitely a thing.
Yeah.
It's funny how much sales has in common with security in some regards.
Oh, for sure. Right.
Social engineering anyway.
It very much is that. But the more, the faster you can kind of let things go and release, sales, you have to control a sale, right? But if you try and control a sale, you'll lose all control of it. So faster you can kind of let that go and not really care if somebody kicks you out of an office and not really care how people talk to you because it really doesn't matter. And, generally from my experience, if they're talking to you like that, they're usually not too important anyways.
Interesting.
So it doesn't really matter.
So the people with power tend to be a little bit easier to talk to?
Always. In my experience, at least in this, your exec level, your C levels, so easy to talk to, in my opinion, right? From my experience. They're down to the right details. They ask the right questions. They don't have crazy power trips all the time.
Isn't it an experience thing too? Is it just because they've done it before, so they kind of know the right questions to ask?
Yeah, it's that they're a little more open-minded, right? Because they can't afford to be, if they're good, right? If they're any good, they can't afford to be closed-minded on what you may be offering. Many times they're also doing selling, right? They're also selling the company in some regard, even a CIO or, certainly CMO, but any of these people, COO, they are selling their own company a lot. So they know the blind spots to look out for. They know what moves things. And generally, if you're early in your career, they're willing to help you as long as you're not, an arrogant asshole. It's your middle managers that never want you to get time with those people. Some people, it's their job. The executive assistants, it's their job to keep them out. But, what I've found is a lot of these executive assistants are super cool, right? They just have to deal with these jerks all the time, right? That come in there. You will do this for me. They read their power player sales book, right? Everything about them is about, presenting power, and everyone will shut that guy down. But you want to stay out of middle management.
Interesting.
It's my experience.
So at some point you made your way over to White Hat, White Hat Security. One of the things I thought was interesting about that is you ended up becoming the #1 sales guy at White Hat for a couple quarters at least. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that. So first of all, did you have any mentors that kind of brought you in? Because the difference between Copier sales and enterprise software as a service sales, that seems to me like a fairly big jump.
It's easier.
Yeah, but different, but very different. And so did you have any mentorship, or like, how did you bridge that gap?
Yeah. Definitely had mentorship. And if you hang around, like if you ever usually in those Copier sales room or any intense sales room, which, hopefully every salesperson experiences that and goes through that and doesn't kind of shortcut around it. You learn a lot of really good stuff. So there's a guy is in town too. He runs one of the branches, and he is one of the best salespeople I've ever met. So you always catch up with these guys and talk to them. And he gave me a lot of good stuff. Certainly my cousin was in sales and enterprise sales, so I got some good stuff for him. And then I just kind of found the people at the company that seemed to know more than others. So those are the ones I would talk to a little bit more.
On the sales side specifically?
On the sales side. What
about SEs? Did you learn anything from them?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I had one of the best SEs, right? Matt was by far one of the best. I mean, I didn't even know what I was doing in some of these meetings, like General Motors and all this in these meetings. Like, I don't know how I got this meeting, but now he kind of had to pull me through some of these. Most of this is technical, though, understanding the market, understanding the environment. The sales, I had already done really intensive sales, so it wasn't hard for me to know when to do what or kind of what to do. But you have to know a lot about the apparatus of technology, security, where you play, how it differentiates to competitors, and that takes some time.
Well, to your point, that's funny. That was going to be my very next question. I never really got the impression you really did understand the product. You certainly knew the words after a while, not at first. And I remember we'd take these long road trips together back when I worked there, and very long, multi hours in each direction kind of thing. And we just sit there talking about all these crazy technologies. And I remember teaching about DNS rebinding as if that was actually going to help you at some point. But I got the impression that it didn't matter, that wasn't even how you were selling it anyway. It mattered that I knew it, but it didn't matter that you didn't know it.
Yeah, definitely. Especially in technology, there's hurdles, right? You have a couple hurdles that you need your technology resources to get you through. Sometimes it's credibility, right? So bringing you Jeremiah in, Jerry in, Jim in, all this, I need credibility in there. Maybe it's a new space. They don't know about it, right? The application security was kind of new at that time. I mean, very scary that some of these companies weren't doing it, which is a whole other topic. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't matter. It matters to get you past, again, just another gatekeeper. But what people are buying is different in each vertical, right? Like for an oil and gas segment, they are trying to buy see what we want to say here. They want,
if you have to censor anything, go ahead.
They want to buy. Sometimes it's outsourcing of a problem, right? They want to buy. Sometimes it's that they don't really care what technology it is. They just want to trust the person's going to be there when it breaks, and every software breaks, right? And everything happens. So there's, with financials, it's different because everyone has the best security, and some of the retailers, they buy everything, right? So it's not that hard of a sale, but they're all buying something different. They're buying, in the end, an end result, the higher up you go. And they can decide on any of those, right? Your differentiators matter just to get you past some segments.
So how do you build a meaningful relationship with these people with whom you only get to spend maybe an hour with a quarter kind of thing?
Yeah.
How does that even work?
Well, the main part is like credibility. So you have to know what you're talking about, and you have to.
But you didn't. So
okay, I didn't know the technology, what I was talking about.
That's right.
But I knew process-wise how it would work, right? I know who's responsible for it. I know sometimes whose job it's going to be replacing, right? And I know how to message that correctly. Mm-hmm. When it comes to relationship building, that's probably how those kind of promotions happen really quick. I spanned it I was always working basically. And I would take I'd get on a flight to like Chicago, be going to a meeting, and I'd take a 5-hour energy at like 7:00 at night just to do even more prospecting and set up more meetings. So just by nature, all those meetings get you. Outside of that, it's going to be geography based because all these people buy with different cues, right? The Northeast is going to buy based on what you know, not really who you are. That may come later. The Southeast and South, it's who you are first, and then it's what you know. So that's a longer sales cycle, and you have to earn the privilege to even talk to them.
I found that to be true. It seems to me, having spent a lot of time selling in California, especially Bay Area, a little bit in New York, and certainly overseas as well, the sales process in the South is completely different than the other regions. It's a much, much, much slower sale. Sales cycles could be double, triple the amount of time, just even to fully really get in the door. I mean, you're talking to them, but you're not talking about the tech. You're not ready yet. They don't even want to have that conversation with you yet. I remember some of the sales training you received early on was sort of like, let's decrease the sales cycle. Let's go faster. Let's do this high pressure sale. And like, can you kind of talk to that? Like, did you try? Did that even work at all?
So that's always the case, right? You just kind of have to know that the management is under pressure for numbers faster. Growth numbers have to be there, but you can't sacrifice, progress for process. And you just have to have a lot going across a lot of regions at the same time. So I think you should largely ignore that if you know your territory really well and you know the apparatus really well. I did try that. I did, read the material, and most sales books.
Did you try it thinking it would work or could work, or did you just try it because you were told to try it?
I didn't think it would work, but I didn't think it would lose me a relationship completely, which is what it did. Major railway, major company, and talking to the C-level over email for a period of months, right? Nothing high pressure about it. And then I challenged the guy and
challenge sale.
Yes. And he never talked to me again. And that's kind of thought what I would happen. But you want to try it. Bottom line is all those books, all that training, it's good for like a couple things. But if you try to emulate it, these are just researchers. They're not real salespeople. Like they just study salespeople, but they'll never get the intangibles of what these guys are doing on the side. Like go to any company, you talk to their top salespeople. What does it take to sell this? It's a hard answer, but it's individual, right? Like these people really are like individual kind of CEOs and individual like managing directors of their territory, and they're able to navigate around things and kind of feel like something's a little off with this. I don't know what it is. I don't think there's one format that always works. In commodity sales, you can do that process based a lot better. The more commoditized it is, the more that makes sense. You're talking about emerging technology. Generally, nobody knows how to sell it yet, right? That's your job, is to figure out how to sell it.
So how do you get that rapport? How do you get that conversation going and maintain that relationship when you get to see them once a quarter, or call them maybe once every couple of weeks or whatever? I mean, you can't get much faster than that unless you live right next to them or something.
It's a moving target, right? So the things that worked for me at the time don't work anymore. Things that work now won't work in the next year. People they see the same. Once some salesperson does something, they tell everybody about it, right? No bigger mouth than a guy in sales. They're going to tell everyone what works for them generally, and they're going to replicate it, and it's going to get around in like a month or so. So what I would do is LinkedIn messages. I had like a huge expense account, right? So I could spend basically as much money as I wanted. So really nice dinners for C-levels across the country while I'm flying over there. And some of those would work. I'm just like, hey, do you want to go get dinner? This is what we do. And yeah. And so that's a way to start it. One thing I kind of learned early on was that I could become friends with people really quickly, and that would hurt the sale. because now they don't feel like they have to buy my stuff. We're just like buddies hanging out, drinking beer, and I don't even need to get meetings. And you're kind of like, wait, what just happened here? How did this? And it's like,
wait, I bought the Cheetos?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just the guy you go get beers with and bitch about your boss and all this stuff. Like, how did this happen? I'm like basically a divorce counselor half the time. And so it's bizarre. But anyway, you want to find where the projects are. You want to sell the value. You want to sell based on your competency, your ability to have like a good dialogue. This is how I do it, right? A really good dialogue with that, and whatever the result is, that'll come around. So you want to close to the next meeting. You need to, if you're selling higher up, you need to get to the people whose actually job it is or the manager of it. If you're selling lower level, you need to have a really good value statement that they're prepped with. And then you need to up level it from there to the person who actually is signing it. And you have to know what questions they're going to ask. So a lot of it's preparing your prospect or your customer for the questions coming that they may not know about. More now than any other time I've seen is the people buying the software have never bought it before. They don't really know how this works. They don't know how finance is going to think about this, how they need to message it to get it over the finish line. So you're almost like their consigliere. Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Soprano. See,
Yeah,
I told you,
go.
I thought I'm going to get shot in the head walking in the studio, and now we go. So you're basically that for them. And if you can do that a little bit more, I think people are a little more successful with it.
So I want to walk you through one of the sales that I did with you, and I want to hear your version of the same story, like how this worked and why it worked. So we were about to walk into a meeting, and you said, Robert, don't say anything to him at all about the company. Don't say a goddamn word. If he brings up the company, answer his question, but don't keep talking about the company. Change the topic back to whatever, and just don't talk about the company. I'm like, okay, you're the boss, which I always take your lead because you know the customer way better than I do. I'm just the technical guy. So I walk in and we sit down with him, and he said, kind of at the front of the meeting, like, I only got like an hour. I got this other meeting that's coming up. It's really important. I can't, he's like, says it like 3 or 4 times, like, oh, it's really important. He's looking at the clock, and he's kind of like, you can tell he's a little antsy about the whole thing. And you're like, oh yeah, well, no sweat. We'll gotta get you out of here in plenty of time, kind of thing. And then you start talking about UT games and his kids and all this random crap. And then like, and he's looking up at the clock every 10 minutes or so. And then we're maybe like 40 minutes into the thing, and he finally like says something about the company, and taking your lead, I answer his one question about it, and then switch back to conversations about whatever it was, that we were talking about before. And now we're like 50, 52, 53 minutes into the meeting, and he's like looking at the clock every couple of seconds now. He's like, and he's like starting to dance around in a seat a little bit, like getting real antsy. And now we're like 5 minutes till, and he finally just blurts out, how much is it? and you're like, oh, and there's like long pause, maybe 2-3 seconds. Oh, and then you kind of pause for another couple seconds, like just the clock's just like ticking down. You could tell he's like getting really on his last nerve about this. And you're like, oh, don't worry about it. I'll send over the numbers. He's like, oh, thanks. Okay, guys, I got to go. And that was the entire meeting. And I'm like, what the hell just happened? Like, we literally spent, I'm not even exaggerating here, maybe 30 seconds talking about the company in a 1-hour meeting, and you definitely got the sale, and you knew you had the sale. What happened?
So I remember you talking about this. I don't remember. I think I remember which account it was.
I won't say it because the camera's been it.
Was it in Houston?
Yeah.
Okay. So the bottom line with that, a lot of work happened before we even went into that meeting. So the technology was prepped, met with the person. I basically had all the right technical details put together, and that was probably the last stage. Outside of that, I didn't really care if he bought it or not, right? You don't want to be too tied to the result that his decision is going to be so important. It's going to break your quota, and it's like people don't like to make decisions like that. And in all honesty, I just enjoy hanging out with people to begin with, right? Mm-hmm. So I had enough. I wasn't going to lose the sale, right? But I had enough understanding of it. So if he didn't ask about it, that would have been just fine. But generally, you kind of know when this is coming. So I knew it's coming, and I tend to not. I don't like to interrupt people almost ever, especially when it comes to sales. Like, customers come first. What I have to say is way less important than what they have to say. so when they're like fidgety, I don't know what is going to come out of their mouth, right? And I'm not really trying to make them uncomfortable, but they're just uncomfortable, right? He wanted to buy it, and he thought he's going into some negotiation where, he's going to say that, I'm going to go high, he's going to go low, and we're going to have this big deal, which is kind of ridiculous in my opinion, because they have a budget. They know what the budget is, right? This goes through resellers anyway. So I'm not going to sign a quote. I'm not going to get it signed right here, pass it down the table. And that's not how things work, right? So I guess the tension built up, and the pricing isn't going to break his budget. I mean, that was a huge company, So, it was just about timing, and that's kind of how, in my mind, you close a deal, right? There's not weird tactics, right? All the work in closing was done up front. Like, if he wanted to tell you to get the hell out, he would have told you that time. If it wasn't worth anything, one of his guys would have vetted it. Like, that would all happen. So by the time we get there, he can go with 1, 2, or 3, right? And I did everything I needed to do, and basically thought that was going to happen.
Well, from my perspective, that meeting was very strange for a number of reasons. Well, not the least of which is you brought me all the way down there, and we didn't talk about technology at all.
But we would have if you weren't there. That's the thing. Like, if you didn't show up, then it would have been all about the tech specs, and we get into all this stuff. And truly, it doesn't matter to him.
Yeah, probably just throwing objections for no reason.
Yeah,
it might have slowed the deal down tremendously. But my interpretation of him kind of rocking in his chair is he did have that meeting to go to, and he telegraphed that, which he shouldn't have. It was a fault on his part to do that. And then you took it upon yourself. You actually already knew that somehow that he had a time delay. He probably even let you know in an email ahead of time or something. Who knows how you found that out? And so you're like, yeah, let's just run out the clock, because all that's really going to happen is he's going to give us a buying signal one way or another, and we've done whatever we need to do here.
I don't want to close someone too fast, and I want it to be their decision, right? Because if it's not their decision, I can probably put together a high pressure motion to do it, right? Maybe I can find this like little trigger and I can put something together, but then they don't renew. And then it's a bad experience. Then they don't want to buy from you again, and they feel like it wasn't their decision. So it has to be their decision. And the last 5 minutes, it's just, we're wrapping up. I only need 5 minutes anyway. And I don't want to sell past what I already have done. I certainly don't want to talk too much about what isn't important. So he got control of the sale. I kind of gave him, it's up to you, like, control it from here, and I'm just here waiting. Now, if he had an objection, that would be a completely different way.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're going to have that guy as a friend long after you leave that company and go to the next company, or whatever, and he'll go to other companies as well. So it's even more reason not to have a high-pressure sale where he's just like, oh, that guy's a jerk. I don't want to deal with that guy again. Yeah,
it makes it a little easier when you, like, I haven't had to, like, interview at a company in a long time, right? It's a little bit different. So I'm only going to go to companies that have valuable products. I'm not going to try and sell something that's not valuable. So when I'm going to another company, I'm calling these guys back again. They know I'm not BSing them. They know I took care of their contract. They know with other reps at larger companies, you don't have much control over a product roadmap, or, I always worked for them more so than I worked for the company I was at.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So walk us through, like, the inside sales versus outside sales, sort of like how you guys talk to one another and work with one another. And
God, that's some strong whiskey. Oh man, bites. Yeah, how inside and outside sales talk?
Yeah, like how you deal with them, how you interact with them, how you feel about them.
Oh, I mean, I love inside salespeople. I love SDRs, especially at the company. They want to be in an enterprise sales role, a strategic role, a VP of sales, and some of those are the hardest jobs, right? SDRs have it so hard, especially now, and their jobs are kind of getting automated, but the automation doesn't work, and they're still held to this quota. So love working with those guys. So a lot of times SDRs need direction, what to go after, where can they use your network, and I just want to make sure they're using my network if I give them to them responsibly, and they're not just blowing these guys up with the same email, nothing custom to it. With inside sales, there's always just a revenue difference of what you go after. Sometimes you'll be a little bit more directly over them, kind of working with them. Other times it'll be really tense because they will have, inside sales managers credit, right? If they can jack that revenue stream up like $2 billion in annual revenue, and they have all of that, and as a enterprise guy, you have anything over $2 billion, you're going to miss some big deals because those companies, 500 to $1 billion have a lot to spend. They take a lot of funding, a lot of private equity money, and they are throwing that out super quick. So I've always felt good about them. There's healthy competition in sales. An inside sales or another person can help you, can get you better. You're both working to the same goal. Where you don't want it to go is where you're competing with the inside salesperson, and they're just, they're that type of salesperson that's a jerk that is always trying to maneuver for your job or your territory or to get those accounts. We had that. You actually met one of the guys I had at one of the companies we worked at, and you could tell it right away, right? With this guy.
Immediately.
I drove all the way up there to teach him all the stuff, and he didn't care because that's a persona you get in sales. Some of these guys will burn that territory to the ground, extract as much money, be as asshole to these customers, and then they'll leave and they'll go do it over and over again. And you can make a lot of money doing that.
So how do you handle leads? When they give you a lead, how do you think about it? How do you triage it? Like, what do you do? They've handed you a fresh lead in your territory, $300 million a year company kind of thing. So mid-size, like, what do you go do?
Well, you want to know if it's qualified first, right? And what the criteria for qualifying it is. These SDRs, a lot of times, they just don't have the experience and the right questions to ask and how to handle it. And it's going to be unlikely they get that meeting unless there's an existing prospect. So I want to take it before it's qualified. I want to take it as fast as I can, make sure that guy gets the credit or that girl gets the credit. And I want to start working that because a lot of times I can convert it better than they can.
Why is that, out of curiosity?
I know more, right? I know the customers, I know how to pitch it. I know if they say this and what the objections are. A lot of that's the beginning of the sale, right? People think of it as lead gen. That only makes a difference if you have a ton of leads. Like some of these really well-marketed companies, huge companies, have so many inbound leads, which means you have more work than you can do. And in that case, you definitely make sure it's always qualified. You only work someone with, budget, authority, timing, push back on the SDR, make sure they're doing more because that's their job.
And an existing product or project. Or
existing. Yeah, you're replacing something. So a little different motion than you're talking about like an emerging tech. You want to get in front of as many prospects fast because you should have the time to do that.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So how do you handle multiple territories? You have two salespeople working on a single deal, or they're vying for it, and headquarters are in multiple states, and like how do you manage all that stuff?
It depends on the company because some companies and VPs and they love to create that competitive tension. I don't think it's good, but it can produce a good result. So if we're both competing for the same deal, I think Pepsi is a good example of one, like where I think their headquarters is in New York, but all their buying is out of Plano, right? Or you have, Visa, the same thing. Split. You have all these accounts that are always split, always a fight. You find the person that can influence it the most in your territory, and you go after that, and you can track it back to that person, and you do whatever it takes to make sure you close that deal without the other rep knowing. Not that you're taking that account, but that's
you are.
Sure, you're taking it, but it's nobody's, right? Because that's how management has structured it, right? Or that's how the CEO structured it, so that first to see it, first to work it. Well, then why don't you know about it? Is what they'll ask the other person. It gets very tense when you talk about people. You're talking about their jobs. It's a lot of stories.
What happens if you do know about it? You're both aware of the deal. Like how does
then
that?
You're both trying to frame it as if your person is important and you have the better relationship and you're more qualified. And in that case, whoever has the best history and kind of the best pull, it's all politics at that point, right?
Ouch.
It's bad. Yeah, but that's how some companies do it, and they just fire the people who lose.
It sounds like something that could very easily end in fistfights.
Yes. Especially get that boiler room culture. That's it's not acceptable, but it's not.
Have you seen that boil over like that?
Yeah,
really?
for sure.
Yeah,
the more money that's out there, the more money people tend to make, like especially in enterprise sales now. They're not getting into fist fights over a deal. There's enough, but jobs on the line. Yeah, I mean, you can
or making a quota versus not making a quota. I mean, I could see how that might put someone over the edge.
Yeah, it's mostly like yelling at each other, but so I don't know that there's a bunch of fighters in sales. It's
okay. Well,
it has
happened.
It has happened. It definitely happens. But you can look up YouTube videos of this happening, right? It's actually pretty funny. You're breaking a computer.
Yeah.
And if you've never felt that stress before, you've never really done sales, right? I challenge that for sure. Outside of that, if it's a very structured company, headquarters is who runs the territory. You work the territories in there, and you never intrude on another territory. And that makes for a more cohesive sales environment. Mm-hmm. Or you have, your EVP comes in, it's like, I'm paying you both on the deal. And then you got yourself something good.
So what happens, and I have seen this occur, so I'm kind of curious what happens from your perspective when some sales guy is at an event and a customer from another region shows up and he's just sitting there with his card like, do I bother wasting even 1 second on this deal? Because I don't get a penny of this.
Yeah. I remember when you saw this one in a big laboratory, right? A major laboratory. So there's no point in wasting your time with it. If you are a very focused salesperson, which you should be very focused, if you have any type of quota and any type of high compensation, you cannot waste time with that. Maybe you can, but your focus should be you should be so focused on your stuff, you don't waste time. And you're polite, right? You give them the factory pitch and you go on, right? It just
seems like really terrible incentives. It seems like they'd at least give them some sort of spiff on.
Don't create a competitive environment amongst your salespeople. Create one where they're friendly enough to welcome other people winning, and then they'll do that, and it's bi-directional. Yeah,
maybe a couple % on the deal. You found this deal at some conference. Great, you got a little chunk of it.
Even better if you can do that. Mm-hmm. But you give what you get, right? So even in those hyper-competitive environments, I found like a buddy of mine in there, I'm always working it like it's my deal and then passing it to them. But I mean, different cultures in the US, right? Different salespeople prescribe to different cultures. Some are very zero-sum game, very Machiavelli. Other people are more helpful. And, what goes around kind of comes around there.
Okay, so how do you feel about VARs? And I mean, it seems like you've used them a lot. So
a lot.
Yeah.
It depends on the territory again, because if you're in a relationship-based territory, you absolutely need them. I like them a lot, right? I think for the most part, they hire good relationship people. I like hanging out with them. They usually have good access into information, like procurement information, stuff I never want to do, right? I don't want to go through all the red lines and meeting with this procurement person about this, and this. I need to focus, so I use them to scale my business out. So I've always loved doing business with VARs, but it comes with time and a lot of trust. They have, a good VAR will have 1,000 vendors, 500 vendors, too many that your product doesn't matter, right? If they can make money on your product, it's important, but the really good ones are interested in the relationship. They keep that relationship very tight. They don't allow in asshole vendors that screw people and then move on to territories. So it's a very good way to for a customer to vet who's coming in and who's coming out. On the other side of that, they hold a lot of power. Once you give them those keys, you have to really make sure they're not keeping somebody out because they only give them a 10% margin when the other company gives them 30%, but it's a shitty product, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it seems like you run into a couple different issues there. One is they have potentially competitive product, So you're selling X, they're selling Y. It's the same product on all metrics, except they're comped slightly better on this other deal.
Yeah.
So that's a massive problem because now you've just given it to a competitor, a qualified deal with whom they have a great relationship and they're going to make the sale versus you.
Yeah.
So that seems like a big problem. But then it also seems like they can add additional friction into your sales process because now you have to introduce somebody who wouldn't necessarily be working with a VAR to the VAR. If they're saying, like, we go through VARs, but we don't work with that VAR, we work with these other VARs. It's like, okay, well, now I have to go through all this work to introduce and create this new relationship, this new BizDev relationship overnight kind of thing.
Yeah, but in the end, that will benefit you, right? So I don't even mind that timeline. Generally, I'll be able to get a pretty good relationship with the client, knowing what I know and who I know at this point in time. If you don't have that, then you need them to get those introductions, hands down.
And so you find out whether to use VARs early on is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, it comes up in conversation. I don't seek it out as much anymore. If they're talking about procurement, then I definitely want to talk to them about who they're going to use and set that contract up early. And generally, we work for startups, right? Emerging technology stuff. With that VAR, they will now know that somebody, one of their customers that's important, bought that technology, which means it has to be good. Now you have an intro to a VAR. First line, this company bought it, that will repeat that to multiple companies, and then you'll get that scale.
Hey guys, real quick, what's a VAR? Sorry.
It's a value-added reseller, which it's a very important distinction.
It's very loaded.
It's very loaded. Do they actually add the value, and what is that value? Some of these VARs, more like the major resellers, they are resellers. They just pass paper. You give them 2.5 points, 5 points, and they just handle the contract stuff. The good ones are what are real value-added resellers, where they understand a company's strategy, what products are in the mix. They're almost an advisor to the client, and they stay very well up to date on products.
Yeah. So how many of them do you find are actually installing the machines or are configuring it for customers and really adding true value as opposed to just saying, oh, here's how you might do that thing and do all the work yourself?
It's hard to say that because I don't work with the ones that don't. So in a matter of 10 seconds, I can kind of tell that, and I will never work
with a reseller.
With a true reseller, unless it's at the end of the deal and it benefits the company.
Because I have a feeling most people who work with just traditional resellers end up with a lot of shelfware. They buy it, but because they have no internal experts working on it and the original company they're buying it from is out of the deal, and the value-added reseller who isn't, they're just a reseller, has no care in the world about what happens after they sell the deal. It just sits there on the shelf and never gets installed or configured properly or whatever.
Yeah, it just shifts the burden to the wholesale person, right? Whoever the company is, because they're not going to get the renewal now that it's shelfware. Or maybe they do and no one pays attention, which does happen, right?
Yeah, of course it happens. All right, let's talk about objection handling. As any sort of new software, emerging software, you can have lots of objections. People are not going to understand the product. They're not going to understand how it works in concert with all these other things that they've got installed. Does it have an API? Does it do this? Does it do that? Like, how do you approach objection handling? Just being smarter than them, or is it more complicated than that?
Yeah. You'll have, again, it really depends on the stage the company is in. If a company's in a later stage, they're going to know all the objections. It's always going to be the same thing. A lot of times it's going to be competitive because they already know about it. In an emerging technology, any startup, you want to get to the objections before they get to them. You also don't want to be coy about what your product doesn't do, right? I've heard, different VPs and stuff talk about what your product does do, not what it doesn't do. Well, this is the most confusing space. Like IT security is incredibly confusing. So forget about all these segments you're going to talk it's played in. You need to talk about what it doesn't within each segment. And then you need to get to the objection before they get to it. So within your pitch, you should be mentioning the objections. And I say pitch lightly.
Bringing them up ahead of time?
Yeah.
Diffusing the bombs, basically.
Yeah. You're just
Interesting.
You're just setting up where the problem may occur. and the trade-offs, right? The more experienced people are, I feel like I certainly don't believe that there's any real solutions. You just have trade-offs, right? You're trading speed and quality. You're trading, noise, like finding everything in noise, or finding nothing and only true positives, right? So there's trade-offs, and you need to expand on where your trade-offs are valuable, and they can choose the other path, but these are the results of choosing that other path. And, depending on who you talk to, they'll accept it or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found a lot of times the objections that we were dealing with later on, they were extremely deep, way in the weeds objections. Like, I would not have expected you to be able to handle them, period. And even most very senior engineers would not be able to handle these objections, like way deep in the weeds. So when that happens and I'm not in the room, how does that go? You just defer, or how do you handle it?
Yeah. Again, that's really specific, because that is a space still that few people understand, right? The company, we built and sold.
We'll talk about it in a second.
Is so deeply technical, and it's so, nobody sees it as that, right? So you don't understand until you start unwinding it. When it doesn't, you can kick that can down the road till a technical will get you in the call. That's one of them. Or you can just bypass it by maybe speaking and presenting more. Does this have a CSV export? Does this API, is it RESTful? And does it do this? Or can you find this one little widget? Does it really matter? That's always what I'm thinking. It's like, is this just a guy trying to throw a wrench in this because he wants to build the product, or he already has a product, or whatever it is? So I'm trying to find that out.
Or is he trying to build a product and wants to know how it's built?
Which was a huge problem for us, like people trying to copy it. Yeah. So you got to find that out real quick, because you'll miss a sale by doing that. But yeah,
or is he just trying to look good to be the smartest guy in the room for his boss or whatever? I mean, there's a lot of versions of this problem.
You'll find, at least I find, based on how they handle the answer, right? If I give them a shorter answer, it's like, okay, thank you. Yeah, that is somebody that wants the answer. That will take a second call. If it's someone being a little arrogant about it and trying to show how much they know, a lot of times they don't make sense. And I know enough to know that I don't even know what they're talking about. Their peers are going to feel the same way you feel about that person, right? So that's where the credibility comes in, and you start navigating around that.
Gotcha. So we eventually hired you away to Bit Discovery. You had a couple of jobs between there, but I think it's worth talking about Bit Discovery, which was a company that a handful of our close friends started together. It's a very small company. So one of the cool parts about this company, as opposed to White Hat was a fairly large company. It's 300 employees or so.
Yeah.
By the time I left, maybe 350 or something. Bit Discovery never got more than 8, I think.
Yeah.
As full-time employees. So first of all, what's the difference between the two types of sales in terms of being the only salesperson, which is sort of a half-truth, because obviously we're all chipping in where we can, but it's mostly true. You're the only person with the title for sure. And White Hat, where you had dozens of salespeople and lots of different territories.
What's the difference in like the job?
Yeah, like how different is it to work in such a small company?
Incredibly different. Incredibly different. Well, on one hand, my resources are some of the best in the world, right? On the other hand, there's not many, right? So, the way we built the company and the funding we took and how we designed it means you got to do multiple things. As a salesperson in general in enterprise sales, you have to manage many parts that you may not feel are sales: contracts, legal, customer service, customer support, right? Partnerships. Those were all things I had to get very deep in, or we wouldn't scale like we needed to. Because obviously one person doesn't scale, but if we add more people, we got to give out more equity. We give out more equity, we make less money, right? We have to take more funding. It just keeps going. So managing that, it's vastly different, right? Because you can't just turn it over. That's not my job, right? Nobody at our company could say that's not my job, because it's all going to see it impact you. When you're with those big companies, you're like, oh, well, that's support's problems. That's the CSM's problem. Oh, that's marketing's issue. You can just kick it over to them and hope executive management handles it, but you will actually see the result of it's a big circle, right? All of those departments are a big circle, and there's, really 5 of us, right? Managing all of these departments, and I kick it over and it's not solved. It just is going to come right back to me. If I create a renewal issue, then I'm going to have to handle that in my new sale, right? And so you get to see the reaction for a bad process you put together, for a good process. Someone does bad, it's going to come right back around and everyone's going to know it. Mm-hmm. And there's also a shared goal in that too. So no one's kind of trying to get out of responsibility.
So one thing I thought was quite different, more tactically on the ground with the sale between the two, is BitDiscovery had an advantage of being a product for which you got basically instant value. Mm-hmm. You didn't have to wait to install it. You didn't have to wait for credentials to run it. There was no installation. You just start running it, which means you could provide value almost immediately, which means as a sales guy, you can actually mine the data and show them things immediately. Like, how much of a difference did that make?
It makes a difference in how you sell it, but it doesn't make it easier because the value still isn't there. They come and say, I would love to do this. I would pay for a product that does this. You show them that it does this. Well, now what am I supposed to do with it? And you've experienced it, right? Like, now what am I supposed to do? I keep going further down. Now what am I supposed to do with it? And you just have to get into, am I just supposed to run this for you, right? Mm-hmm. And these aren't bad questions they're asking because they do need to find the value at some point. Teams are getting better at dealing with finance. So they have to figure out what is that point of value and where's my ROI on it. So it's a lot different. You just shift it around. It's better at opening. So for all companies now, all these security companies and cybersecurity, IT, they're having trouble getting in the door. If you can go blow them away with something new, that gets you in the door. It's valuable. They will want a second meeting with you. You are showing them live data. That is what's going to be needed to get anyone's attention now. There's just too many vendors out there. Mm-hmm. So that's big, but you're just moving that problem down later, right? Now you got to find a way to get budget. You got to create budget. You got to do all those things.
Right, because it's emerging.
Exactly.
So one thing another thing that was different about these two companies, it showed a massive maturity in you in terms of your technical capabilities. So at White Hat, I can confidently say I think you had no idea what you were selling. Maybe generally speaking you did, but not like what's going on or how it works or anything like that. At BitDiscovery, after maybe 6 months of doing it, I think you reached this weird tipping point. And you came to me one day, you were talking to me on the phone, and you're like, Robert, I don't think they know what they're talking about. I think I know more than they do. And I'm like, you do, Kyle. You actually know more than they do now. And you got to be extremely competent, extremely technical in this field over the 3 years or so that you were part of the company before we got acquired. So how much of a difference did you think that made? I didn't even need to be in the room is kind of what I was saying. You could do it yourself.
Yeah. I mean, you go for the path of least resistance, right? If I have a really good SE, then I don't need to, my time isn't worth learning the products. I can just bring this person in and do what I focus on and expand that. Mm-hmm. If I don't have a good SE, which there were times of that, then I have to be more technical with it. I have to learn from or get one of the better ones with me. There's not that option, right? There just wasn't that option. So I had to be better with it because you can't go as wide as you can deep. So it's whatever you need to do to make it, and it also helps when there's a large financial incentive there to mm-hmm. make sure you do.
Mm-hmm. But now that you do know quite a bit more than most customers do in that regard, do you find it easier to sell now, or is it just again kicking the can down the road? It really hasn't changed anything for you.
It's still easier to sell because the technology is still emerging, so there's still a lack of understanding about what this stuff does. And how to operationalize it and how to think about it, where to focus on it, how to budget for it, all of those things. So it's beneficial.
I feel like you could give a presentation on the topic and be authoritative on it now, where you couldn't have done that in the previous company.
Yeah. It makes you just a different kind of salesperson, right? You see this with, you see this with like, I almost think of like the way CEO sells, right? They know a lot about their company. Let's say they're not as technical, but they're technical enough on it. They're more focused in who they're talking to. What they say is a little bit more impactful, but they may not outsell your dumb sales guy that can network quick, is always on the road, and is just pulling in SEs. That guy might be a better salesperson than that CEO that knows a lot for it. So they're just trade-offs, right? You're trading off depth for breadth, and I don't know who wins that, right? Whoever, I would say, whoever is getting in front of the right customers and wherever the market is going, like if it's very dense in like financials or retail or something like that, then, a CEO goes to one of those conferences, blows the roof off the place. But if it's kind of getting bought, then that salesperson that's just hanging out in, San Francisco doing all the thing is going to wipe the floor with them.
I just had a funny thought. Have you ever thought about becoming an SE at this point?
Oh, God.
Because you are now, I think you could pull it off.
I never wanted to be in sales. I always thought the SE is the way to go, but no, you can't go back. You know what I mean? Like, not in a sense it's going back, but when you're a little more technical, but you also have a sales background, there's also another kind of niche there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So when we were talking about this like ultra lean sales model, and I think a lot of startups find themselves in this model, they just have a couple of co-founders and they just hire their first salesperson, maybe the third or fourth person after the technologists. How do you leverage the executives? Like where in the sales process do you leverage them? How do you bring them in?
Yeah. Well, first they need to make a really good decision bringing on their first salesperson. And it'd be very clear what they expect from it. Like, is this exec level position like I was getting put into, or is this just a salesperson until they hire an exec? You get two very different results there.
How so?
Well, you will think of it as more of a company and selling the company and building the company than just making commissions. If you're part of the exec, you're getting ready. It seemed like we were always getting ready to take some more funding and more funding. So we're constantly gathering more reps we're going to hire. Sometimes we had to hire like an SE or something like that, different partnerships. So you're more concerned with the company. You're more concerned with building a really good foundation. If you're just hiring an SE to do that or a salesperson to do that, you are on quarter to quarter. I'm doing my job in sales. I'm not doing anyone else's. I'm not helping here. I'm not running support. I'm not doing anything with partnerships. I am only focused on selling. So you're going to get really different results. When founders are, I think, hiring their first salesperson, it's tough, right? Like obviously, Jeremiah, really good at this. You're really good at this, been around for a long time. I think most founders aren't like that though. And every salesperson, any good salesperson could sell themselves. And I feel like they get a little enamored with, keys to a Ferrari that they throw out, or, oh, this guy was really successful here. Look at all he ran here. But you don't realize they weren't really doing that hard work. It was someone else, right? They're talking about it, but it's hard to decipher that they're full of crap and they're going to run that company into the ground after a year.
So have you run into these full of crap early on executives?
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. I mean, I think probably the majority of founders, in my experience, make that mistake, especially the more intellectual that person appears to be, right? If you're more intellectual and you're talking about science of sales and methodologies and you're in a startup, right? People haven't figured this out yet, unless like it's growing at, 10,000% and you're trying to, up level it quick and you need to bring in a bunch of people and impress some private equity firm or whatever, then that's a bad decision. They're going to just pillage that company, right? They're going to take all the stock. They're going to know how to negotiate it. Same with like a CEO, like founders hiring a CEO that like maybe a board of advisors recommended, and they have this pedigree and background, but they were never selling the product. They didn't design this. They were just operationally focused and intellectual. They don't really have that experience. And I think people get really, and I see this all, I just saw this, met with a guy about a month ago with this going on. huge issue, right? You'll lose your whole company to that. They will sell you out of existence, basically. Like salespeople will hate them, they'll leave, and you won't ever know what's going on.
So when do you bring in the executives into the sales process? Kind of skipped over that.
Oh, well, it depends, right? Depends on their expertise at different times. It's a lot of scenarios too. If they're very technical, you bring them in when the most technical people are in there, usually after the first demo, right? You'll bring it in. I like to bring them in to like close a deal. Very loaded what close means. I think of it as depending on the executive strong suit, right? All of them have different strong suits. Can they tie everything together in a real strategic story? Or do I need them to open my sale up for me in that? I never try to change an executive's demeanor or what they want to talk about. I just bring them in the right place. So it all depends on what their strong suit is.
Yeah, that's a good answer. So we also had, at that company in particular, we had no marketing support. I think we spent a total of $3,000 on marketing the entire time we ran that company on like one dinner or something, or something like that. And especially in the days of COVID, where you didn't get to go throw a bunch of dinners, even if you wanted to, even if you wanted to spend the money doing that kind of exercise, those sales meetings, we didn't really have that either. We really didn't have any way for you to interact with customers other than, directly through a very small network of friends and Jeremiah and I posting on Twitter or blog posts or whatever. So how do you overcome not having a pipeline?
You say small network of friends, but these networks are like leading the top companies in the world and Goldman Sachs on the board of different things. So
yeah, I mean, all things in perspective. Nothing compared to having a full-time inside sales team and SDRs and all that stuff.
Yeah. So you have to I think I only hired 2 people, right? When we were there. So you have to scale it out. You scale it out through resellers, right? So that's how we did it. OEM partners and resellers. So I got my sale, I multiplied it, right? By quite a bit. Like at that point you have like 50 reps all selling this and you can scale it out that way. And it has to be, and you're flexible enough to run good financial incentives for those guys too, because we don't have to pay our own people for it. So that's a big part of it. What was the second part of your question?
Well, I was just kind of curious about like in the age of COVID, not having, because the open rates went to 0 during COVID.
Yeah.
And it was already bad for CISOs. They don't open emails. I'm sure it's the same with CEOs and CFOs. It's all the same cohort of people. They do not respond well to blanket emails or messages on LinkedIn. So how do you handle that?
Yeah. So with this product, it's different because there is value I can show them without having to ask them anything. So that was part of like my own nurturing pipeline. I had all these contacts, right? I knew a lot of people. You knew a lot of people. We had a pretty good network. So I would send them targeted emails about, what they can do and what's out there and give them access just kind of freely. Is a little easier because we started as if we were selling in COVID, right? There was almost no travel, right? We were selling completely over that. So it's a different pace on demos. It has to be more engaging because no one's paying attention on Zoom, right? Everyone's doing their email. So you have to engage them. You have to drill concepts into them. So we had already had the practice of doing that, right? We already had kind of the methodology built, which helped. So I think we could do it a little better than others. But it's very difficult.
A nice little trick I learned during that whole COVID sales process thing is if you share something and then unshare and then reshare, and they're like now checking email during that non-sharing part. If you share, it takes over their screen and they're forced to pay attention again. You can kind of get their attention.
Yeah.
So it was tough. It was really tough. I'm surprised it worked at all.
To
be honest.
It's incredibly hard. And it's just, it takes a lot of energy because if you don't bring energy to it and you're expecting this client to run your sale for you, that's kind of a methodology, a little more commoditized product. You want to make it about the customer. You want to make it all about them. That's great, but they don't know what the hell they're talking about, right? This is a brand new product, a brand new space. You have to, there's a lot of education. And if you sleep on it and you're just meandering through the conversation, not projecting through it, and kind of being an authority on the subject, then it'll never go further.
Yeah. So the first like 5 minutes of the conversation, they have to be high energy. They have to be opening with jokes. I find that extremely tedious personally, and you do a great job of it. So it's great to kind of see that in action, you know, like, hey guys, how you doing? How's your weekend? It's raining out there. I saw, wow, you staying dry or whatever. You come up with some random opener.
Yeah.
That must take a lot of practice.
Well, it's not really, I don't even think about it. I just start, talking. And a lot of times it sound like an idiot, right? Like you just have to be open to it. It's like, I'm going to say a bunch of stuff, and generally it's not offensive, but sometimes it's, a little too much information about me and how my morning went, but whatever works, right?
That's funny. All right. So BizDev, this is another thing that you talked about a little bit. You were basically in charge of BizDev, and a small company. That's a little bit of an odd thing. But what else are you going to do in a small company, right?
Yeah.
So what should companies who are kind of a little bit smaller be thinking about when they're trying to find partners to help them?
Lead generation and scaling your sales force, right? A lot of these companies sell one product, right? At least the companies that are going to take this on, right? They're going to sell one product, and their salespeople are going to be dying to add more value, right? They're maybe entrenched in accounts, and they've been selling the same product for 5-10 years, and these are still considered startups. So you need to scale your sales force out that way. You don't want to hire more salespeople if you don't have to, right? If you can do it for less cost, it's going to help everyone in the business. So selling them when it comes to resellers is really important to get those contracts good, those relationships good, working with the right people there, empowering those salespeople, even taking on those sales if they can do that, because that's going to be your lead gen, and those guys will happily turn their sales over to you. If you can go make money, they can sell it. You focus on the top reps, everything trickles down from there. Mm-hmm. As far as like getting the company bought is another big part of that, right? And that's where, the CEO is more in charge of those conversations. Mm-hmm. Technical alliances, right, would be part of big BizDev. How we integrate, which is another way to say, how do you scale also, but in a very different way. Mm-hmm. And so those contracts take a lot more time, right? A lot more arduous. You have to have everything put together.
But it's still worth it.
Very much worth it. Mm-hmm. I would say that's the way to do it. I would hire, especially in this time, hire as few people as you can, pay them well, treat them well, and scale the sales force out. So the people doing the process of opening a sale and closing a sale, these are things anyone at any company should be able to do. Focus your team on that middle part of the sale, which is adding the value to the product, differentiators, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So you also had a weird, because it was so small, you actually had the weird distinction of reporting to the board as opposed to just a sales manager of some sort or, vice president or something like that.
Yeah.
So how did that go? How did you sort of prep yourself for that conversation? How do you think it should be done?
Well, it was a lot harder at the beginning than it was at the end, right? Presentations generally go the same way, but our board was great. But incredibly well prepared, so smart on the topic. One of the board members, the best listener I have ever met, ever. And so, honesty, always, right? Honesty to a fault, like this is what's going on, this is what's good, this is what's bad, and always have a way of addressing it, which is how you should be at any point.
Sure.
Where are the sticking points? Right? What do you not know how to do? And then you need all your growth numbers and revenue projections, right? That's all just normal stuff you need. But having the data to back it up and very clearly articulating it. It's natural. You're in sales mode. You're talking fast and everything. I would slow that way down for a sophisticated board member. Sometimes it feels like you're in the firing line where they're just question after question. This contradicts this, or that contradicts what this person said. But I think openness is good for that. And
you said something about being honest. What's the advantage, if there is any, in being dishonest as a salesperson in that role?
Well, if you're dishonest, you're blaming it on something else. Generally,
it's the product's fault.
Yeah, which it may be, right? Yeah. Salespeople love blaming the product. It certainly can be. Actually, everything's a product problem, right? If you go back to it, why do we even need salespeople, right? Because the product isn't as good as it should be.
Right.
But it looks weak, right, to blame a product because that's what you're there to do, what the product can't do. So you want to either leave that company if the product really doesn't work, leave, right? And you don't see promise in it. Or you want to find a way to do it despite, whatever excuse is out there about the product or it doesn't do this. There's always a way around it, right?
I really like that. So what you just said, if I can paraphrase, is sales does what the product can't do.
Yeah. I mean, you didn't need any salespeople for Instagram, right? They did it with like 10 engineers, right? You don't need salespeople to do that, but it is so hard to build a product like that. Right? I mean, right space, right time, right team, all that.
Interesting. So how do you build a quota? I mean, how do you decide? Because it seems a little like a negotiation, just a very lopsided one.
This is different. It's different in like the VP of sales role I was in, right? And the boss I had was awesome, right? And the board was cool, right? But that quota was built on what we could achieve logically. I mean, we had so much data on if we have this many leads, we can do this, an engineer can fund this. And, the product manager, Lex, and I would always talk. It's like, give me this feature. Yeah. Can you give me this output? Oh, no, not with that feature, right? I just know what the customers are going to buy. So it's more negotiation on the back end. Like, what can we as a team commit to? And what do I feel like we can deliver with no marketing and with this? That is a very different conversation, right? So all we do is we take down the quota, but we also take down the product and the product features, which I need for renewals and for everything. So yeah, you're always putting yourself out there in that position. You have to take on a little more risk. When you're at a company and you're just an enterprise or strategic sales manager or whatever it is, you don't really get that decision, right? You have data to back it up, but they know what they want to see. They'll kind of give metrics to get there, and you're going to get a quota. You can argue that it's not fair. Sometimes you can get it moved. They'll generally jack up somebody that's a higher performer. And then when they think about leaving, they'll take it down, right? And that's probably the negotiation. Everyone has a different way of doing it. That's how I kind of did it. If it truly was unreasonable, then I'm looking for, and there's no discussion about it, I'm looking for a job where it's reasonable. Mm-hmm. And it's always gets moved and you always get, more money if you're worth it, right? Mm-hmm. If you're not worth it, then leave. You shouldn't be arguing at all.
Okay. So how do you manage the sales forecasting? So you have a quota and you're still 2 months away from having to make it. How do you telegraph?
Depending on how well you know the product, I kind of always had a good sense of what we would come in at and what was reasonable. Market conditions, who we're talking to, even if the sale isn't good. I go a little bit more on the safe side. So I would go a little lower, but it's not lower from real sales methodology. We didn't have all these qualifiers. We didn't have all the components of a sale that anyone forecasting a deal, especially at a public company, would need. So you kind of gotta think about that. I would go on the side of what do you think 100% you could close? You have 5 deals you're working, right? And it's an unbudgeted line item and you know all these customers well, one of them will come in at whatever the average sales price is.
And that's a percentage kind of roll of the dice?
Yeah, but it generally works out if you know the qualification levels.
So walk me through that. So I have 20% likelihood on these 3 and 40% on this one. And I think this would come in at these different levels and you kind of sum it all up. So
it's very different at like a budgeted line item company, right? But if we're talking about emerging tech, right? I'm looking at anything of what I feel is like 60%, 70%. Everything else is getting thrown away. I'm not thinking of that. And then I'm taking whatever I've been historically closing, right? When I'm getting into those deals, 1 of 3, I'll get 1 of 5. I'll get 1 of 10. I'll get whatever of all those deals come in at, I'll get. Now, if I can always expect like my reseller to bring me 1 and I don't know where it's coming from, and then I'll go, okay, I'll get 2 deals of this magnitude by the end of that. Mm-hmm. And that's as good as you're going to get. You can create all these methodologies and these, whatever sales book you read that month, right? Has a methodology, but it's not going to be accurate. It's not accurate, right? We had the, benefit of a CEO knowing how much BS a lot of that stuff is. Very different though, from a business with a line item. You can go through really good, MEDIC and whatever it is, forecasting methodologies where you can get very close because it's budgeted. You're replacing a product. They have to do it by this time. There's a compelling event. So it's a much different sales forecasting. That is what you'll be checked against at a more mature company. At a startup, it's, an intelligent person looking at some data, licking their finger, sticking it in the air and say, that's what we'll come in at.
And was it accurate? Did you find?
Yeah, I only missed. I think I only missed 1 or 2 quarters. Right. I only missed under 1 or 2 quarters, but then I obviously would go way over. Yeah. That's still a missed forecast.
Yeah, technically,
right? But they don't care about that at a startup, right?
Yeah.
You're just growing at 600% or
unless you miss it 2 quarters in a row, and then you're done.
And then you have some problems. Yeah, that's definitely. That's very dependent, but yeah, it certainly is.
Okay, so we did eventually get acquired.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about your involvement in that?
Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of major companies. I don't know if we talk about which ones, but yeah, we won't talk about it. But I got to pitch a lot of major companies on the product. They all want to see kind of how the sales product goes, sales demo. They ask very good questions. I mean, the people brought in to do mergers and acquisitions are just sharp. They're very experienced in this. So in the highest level questions are the ones you have a hard time answering. Why do customers buy it? Why do they not buy it? Something I'll never forget, right? One of these execs asked me, that's hard to answer, right? Because there's a lot of answers, but you have to summarize very difficult concepts into something very simple rapidly.
It's almost like you have to coalesce all your objections into a paragraph or something.
Yeah. And for different companies, it's different. For different sectors, they don't care. If you cannot simplify it, you don't know it. If you don't know it, I don't think they're going to buy it. Maybe they will, right? But that's going to be an uphill battle. So, I got to pitch it, got to talk through the sales cycle, which is really important. Obviously, had to talk to renewals, customer support, and what we do, what they demand, what the partner network does, how we're going to build for the next year, how we're going to hit this, how we differentiate. And, I never got too nervous about it. I thought too much about it. But I was always worried about giving away too much information because I'm on the front line. I'm going to give these guys enough information. And they have a massive sales force, thousands of salespeople, right? Some of them tens of thousands. And they could take that information and now I'd have to adapt a new strategy rapidly. Mm-hmm. And that would be difficult.
Yeah, no kidding. So our timing was amazing. We literally could not have timed that better. If we had been off by just 2 more months, the market crashed. Valuations went to 1/5 to 1/10 in some cases, what they were before. Did you see that coming? Were you?
Yeah, I think, our talks and Jeremiah half the time were about the market conditions and just how, it's COVID and, the Fed's printing all this money. And we're already in these weird times. And it's like, well, this can't last, right? I honestly don't know how it still is, but it is. So I thought early on, I was ready to sell faster. Like everything in a startup, It's like Entourage, right? Or it's like, what are all these movies? Like Breaking Bad. In a 24-hour cycle, the worst that can happen and the best that can happen happens. Like, I started out getting a contract I never thought I could have, and now this customer isn't renewing. What? Like, it's just insane. Like, we're getting this issue here, and now we're about to get acquired, right? Mm-hmm. So tons of stuff in the same day going on. And you're used to that in sales. Yeah, every quarter you experience this, but not on a daily basis or a weekly basis. It'll play with your emotions. So early on, I wanted to sell faster. As we got to the end, I wasn't ready to necessarily sell. I just needed more help, right? Just because I thought there could have been more money out there, right? But in the end, I think it's all a great exit.
So how has your role changed now that you're at Tenable?
Quite a bit. There are so many more resources, right? So tons more resources, more so like kind of like over this revenue stream of the product line. So still engaged with customers, but at different times of the sales cycle.
How is sales different now that you have access to all these sales reps?
Well, it's a lot more training, right? So it's more enabling those sales reps. It's more talk about the nuances of the sale that they'll get into, because sales reps are great, right? Some of them are phenomenal, right? So you don't have to teach them sales whatsoever. It's just about this product line. It's in this certain segment, and what's the best way to do it? What should we price it at? What does it normally get priced at? Partnerships, like making sure that's going, different things, probably don't want to talk about the business, but it's more overlay-ish, right? More kind of managerial stuff over a certain product line.
Okay, so before we move on from Bit Discovery, was there any sort of big sort of things you would warn people away from running this super, super lean startup, or do you think this is the way to do it? I mean, you've done both, right? You've had the bigger, 300 person company. Tenable is quite a bit larger, and Bit Discovery was really tiny.
Yeah.
Would you warn people away from that, or is that a good model? Should we have taken way more capital?
It is a great model at the beginning. It is a fantastic model at the beginning. There's so much you're going to have to know about your sale and your product and what you need. I think every company needs to start this unless they want to just get raped by a VC, right? Which that's what they're doing now, right? Like a lot are just, they're taking more and more money, right? And I think it also matters which, VCs or private equity, you take. So that's really important. So I think you should always start it. For someone that's going to lead a sales force there, you just need to know that it's going to affect a lot of things, right? You are going to need to de-stress yourself big time, right? Almost find like some type.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
It is so intensive because it never turns off. Sales in general doesn't turn off. Information security doesn't turn off. But it doesn't stop after you hit a quota, right? Like it never does. You now are supporting these clients. You're setting up this infrastructure, right? And if you fail 2 quarters, even though you're doing a good job of setting a foundation up, it's going to be bad later. On the other hand, if you extract all the value and all the money out of it too early, you don't build a good foundation. You're just chasing it every quarter. So you have to have really good relationships with the founders. You have to be very clear on what the expectations are. I think it's a good way to start. And then I would take probably a lot of funding right when you know that.
Oh yeah, you would add more gas on the fire.
Oh yeah, I would have. I mean, we probably could have done a lot with 10 more salespeople like it could have hired. Just even with 3, we could have done a lot, but it affects your equity, right? Mm-hmm. So if you were just trying to make a lot of money, that's a really good way to do it because you keep all the equity, right?
Yeah, agreed. Okay, so I have a question that I think I'm going to start asking more and more of people in sales and in marketing. Why do sales and marketing do not get along? What is it? Give me the rundown.
Okay. Very controversial, I'm sure.
I'm sure whoever whoever reads this or listens to this they're gonna hear a different version of whatever you're saying. So choose your words wisely.
Yeah, this depends at the company I was at and the experience I had, but there are some phenomenal marketing people, right? Really well versed on the product, can give a talk about the product, can talk to a customer, understand that. I've met very few of those people, right? Just like I have met so few. The split between sales and marketing is difficult, right? Because some of these companies have been at SDRs or under marketing, right? Because it's lead gen. Others, they've been under sales. Marketing, depending on the company, wants to promote more leads, right? They want to get more leads in. If they're not well connected and they're put in a very competitive environment with the sales team, then they'll be incentivized to push leads out to the salespeople that are not good enough, right? They're not good at all. And then the salespeople will push back, right? On the other hand, they may be doing a great job and the salespeople might not be able to close those leads. From my perspective, the best information you can get from a company is the people on the ground. You can't really understand what's going on with your customer if you're not in front of them. If you don't go through a full sales cycle, if you don't understand what's really bothering, because they're going to tell you one thing and it might not be that thing. A salesperson is going to understand that. So you're going to have this combative it's really the lead gen, this combative environment where you're not qualifying these fully and everyone's trying to blame each other on why this doesn't happen. So for really good marketing people, they make the salespeople, right? Like I think about remember Cylance, right? Was another one that had really good Palo Alto back in the day. I'm even sure they still do, but they're just huge. Back in the day, had great marketing. It's like a firewall company. I didn't think there was anything special about it, but they were everywhere. Great marketing. I'm sure great product and everything. I'm trying to think of some of the others. Then some of these other companies, I don't even know what they do, right? I don't know one product of theirs that's out there. Meanwhile, I can tell you a lot about some companies that I've had nothing to do with. So that's where the tension is, I think, in general, is between sales and marketing is on the lead gen. But I think when you go to some of these companies, I've met some like really good product marketing managers that I can't believe how much they know about it. I can't believe how well they can position it. You could almost put them in a sales meeting and they could do it. It's just, it's hard to find that because that may not be their job. Their job may be like posting on social media and things.
So is it just that they're not doing sales qualified leads in the correct funnel? Is that all it comes down to?
Yeah. Well, it's that
seems like a minor issue, really.
It's that they may see the world at 30,000 feet. That's not actually how it is, right? This is the same problem with like sales managers too, right? Or sometimes as you get higher up, if you get too far away from the customers, you don't really understand why they're buying. You're getting the information from one like you remember the movie Black Hawk Down, right? Really, really great scene in there where what's his name? Sean Penn's brother. I can't remember the guy's name, but anyway, he's in there and they're going into an op that is during the daylight, and those guys are chewing on, I can't even remember what it's called, but it's like a cocaine amphetamine. And the guy's like, caught. Yeah. He goes, what are you guys, what are you nervous? You look nervous. He's like, yeah, you at 30,000 feet flying over everything, you're fine. But on the ground, it's unforgiving. And that's the way I think most salespeople are going to think about it. It's like, you don't really know what we're running into. We're trying to explain it. Of course, salespeople, whine and complain a lot, so it's hard to trust everything, but you don't really understand like what we're actually going through. You're just saying the salespeople suck because they can't sell this. And, I'm just going to throw out this massive campaign and things are just going to work. It's going to work. I'm going to create this ad. I'm going to send these customers these pins and there's your leads. We got, 50,000 people from the booth that nobody wants to take a meeting. All they wanted was this free raffle you gave out. Those aren't leads, right? Mm-hmm. Those are contacts. Give me leads, right? And that's where I think the tension.
So what about the online marketing aspect? Are they misrepresenting the product or just not not
company specific, right? It's super company specific. I don't think so. I mean, I just never expected in any job I did direct sales. Right now I'm doing something different, but I'm talking like more direct sales. I'm not expecting marketing to do my job. I'm not expecting they'll majorly aid in my job, right? I run a territory that experiences technology very different than the rest of it. They blanket to a massive audience. They're doing it globally. I'm doing this in this state or this region. I have to be my own marketing. I have to set up my own marketing events. So I think the best way to run it that I think salespeople like is if you get the funding and the support to run your own events within your own territory that makes sense, right? Like, major companies, like major real estate and financial companies, they don't go into markets they know nothing about, right? They don't go pump, tons in there. They go find somebody that does know about that market, and that's the expertise.
Yeah, but the problem with that is it assumes that all salespeople are equally or even somewhat entrepreneurial, and a lot of them are not. They might want cash, and that's good because at least they're driven by something, but they're not necessarily thinking, oh, how might I get like 5 more leads out of this region? They're not thinking, oh, I should do this dinner event here and here and here necessarily, right? So how does marketing let go of that cash confidently and say, okay, here's $5,000 this month to go spend on events?
Yeah, so that's very specific. You're hiring the wrong regional directors, wrong regional managers.
So it shouldn't be the reps doing it.
If they're not, well, that is a kind of a rep, right?
Okay.
It's a regional manager, direct. I mean, those people these are titles. I mean, let's be honest here.
Okay, so it is the reps.
They're very highly paid, very highly paid reps. Yeah, you should hire those people for those territories. If that's your kind of business, right? If you're doing more transactional deals, then it is more online marketing. You shouldn't be giving it to sales reps that are strictly inside sales. How are they going to market? To a field rep, that rep needs to know the conferences, knows the resellers, know what to put into, what to support.
Theoretically knows that.
Then you got a different problem.
Yeah.
You got a rep problem. And then I would pull that person's funding. If they're not like that, why should they get that authority, right?
So that's what you do is on the back end, you measure how many leads they got.
You don't really need to do that necessarily. I mean, you could do that, but you're going to find that out in the numbers. You're going to find that out downstream. That's really what you want anyway, is revenue, right?
Sure.
You just want to track it.
Interesting. Okay, well, that's good. So how should you work with them beyond just giving a bunch of money to sales? Because that seems like now you've just taken all of marketing and putting it in sales. Is there?
Yeah. Well, it's all sales, right? It's all technically distribution, right? If we want to roll it up.
I mean, in a perfect world, if you could make anything happen that didn't involve just marketing being a funnel to give money to sales, how would that work?
Yeah. So it's going to,
because you know what that sounds like. It sounds like you just said we should get rid of marketing.
Yeah. you should just have the influence of those salespeople, which, creative people, the last person they want to talk to is a salesperson, right? Telling them what the idea should be about how to innovate in something. So in larger companies, or if you're selling something that's been sold, then marketing might have a better idea about it, right? In these smaller companies, though, they really need to work together. I'm sure it's going to be argumentative at the top level, but there should be budget for that individual salesperson to explore those opportunities if they're of that caliber, right? And do that. But it's also who has the most success. If your marketing team is kicking ass, then they're giving all these leads over. You shouldn't touch them, right? Salespeople should have very little influence on that.
Yeah, I totally agree. But that seems like it requires at least a couple quarters to vet out.
It does.
Yeah, so you can't do this. Maybe years, right? Exactly. You're not going to find this out in a week. You're not going to find it out in even a month or two. It's quarters or years.
These are the BS. We have to grow by this and show me something that works today. People just want to feel comfortable.
But if you don't do that, you don't get acquired. So you have to do it. You have to grow by 30% year over year.
But it may not be the influence of anybody that is saying this. Everyone comes with Anyone can make that claim with an iron fist. I will get 300% growth, and I'm going to increase these leads, and we will do it, right? But that doesn't mean anything. Like anyone can say.
Well, it means it if you do it. If you do it, and then you make those numbers, and so everyone should say it, and then the few people who do it.
And then cue the excuses.
Yeah.
Come the next quarter when they don't do it, it's somebody else's fault. And if they do it, there's usually somebody making all that happen, right?
Yeah, so it seems like there's got to be a shortcut to all this. Are we really having to wait years to figure out whether marketing or sales is doing a better job and then fire one of the two of them?
I think you can do it faster if the CEO or the board is savvy enough to see, okay, what are you doing? And are we measuring it? Like, how is it working? I just launched this campaign. How many views did you get? How many people figured out a lead form? Mm-hmm. That's one metric. And then we can say, now we gave these to sales. What did they say? They're all crap. Like, why are they like that? So if you can go through like a Socratic method to, each of these, then it's good. But I think it's hard. I mean, a lot of these startups are first-time startup people, right? Like first-time CEOs, first-time founders, so they don't know how to do that. So these CMOs and CROs know more than they do. They've been around the block. They could BS it if they wanted to, right? Faster than that. So you need good advisors that have seen this before and can drill into that data. And anyone trying to hide data, I mean, I think that's a pretty good evidence that that's what's going on.
Okay, well, all right. So what about like sales automation and marketing automation software? It seems like that could all kind of, because if it's true, if marketing has a whole bunch of leads and they land in sales's bucket and then sales never makes the phone call because they think they're all crap and they never even bother to follow up on it. Well, marketing can make a strong claim like, look, they're not even looking at these leads.
They'd be right.
And they'd be right.
They'd be right.
But also flip side of that, it's like, well, we've given a whole bunch of leads to sales and only the ones that they call they're closing. They are closing those things. So we are sending them good leads and they're happy.
Then there's no conflict.
Then we can, but it seems like that's the answer. It seems like there's some sort of software, like the middleware there that can kind of detect who's at fault to some degree.
I mean, yeah, but you know how those things go. It's like technology breaks, someone blocks it. They're not even getting through the filter, right? But it was a good campaign, but we couldn't even get on there because of this issue. Statistics, right? You got to really know how they're gathering the data and who you can trust. I think at the the end of the day, bottom line, can you trust these people you've put in charge to get you the right data? And do you know when they're not telling the truth about it?
So it really comes down to all needs to be on a blockchain, clearly.
Yeah. I mean, it's
but seriously, how do we make a system that is resilient to tampering on either side? It just works. It either works or one person is a bad actor.
Yeah. I mean, it can, but the customers, everything you do to get into a customer is going to be repeated, and then it's going to end up getting spammed, and it's going to be hard to keep that up because the customer's behavior is going to change, right?
Sure. Yeah.
You start, the
campaigns will degrade over time, of course.
Yeah. So it's got to come up. So,
but you should see that it turns out that when we do this campaign, they call the lead, but then nothing ever happens. They maybe even follow up once, but it's clear it's not a viable opportunity. When we do this campaign, it turns out we get 2 or 3 levels deep into the sales process.
Yeah, it needs to be. Yeah, you could do that. When does it end in the sales process? Well, some salespeople won't convert that to an opportunity until it's a fully qualified lead. And then you're saying these guys aren't converting them. They're sitting on the opportunities because you're not saying it's fully qualified, because once it is fully qualified, now they're responsible for everything around that, right? They're responsible for closing that sale. That affects their closing rate.
All right. So now you're talking about sandbagging at the end of the quarter, right?
You're not saying, no, you're not sandbagging because there's no metric of it because you haven't even converted it.
Yeah, but you are still sandbagging.
You could be sandbagging a lead, but it may not be a good lead, but you may want to still work it. So what happens is salesperson works it as if it's a real deal, and then it converts and goes to 50% right away, right? And then like, well, they've done what they needed to do, right?
But they may not tell anybody that they're working that deal until the next quarter when they know that they're much more likely to make their numbers.
Exactly. Yeah. That's kind of the game that gets played.
Yeah,
and
it's a game. So how do you stop that?
You don't have negative incentives for converting those leads. You don't hammer on your salespeople about you converted this, but you didn't close it, right? I mean, you get into the details of why that didn't happen, but if they feel responsible, super responsible every time, and they have to get this done, then there's going to be a problem. And the reason they feel really responsible is because the person in charge of sales is trying to, make sure it doesn't look like it's their fault when sales don't close.
Interesting. So the time at which you start the process of working the deal is artificially delayed by some amount of time. Not you specifically.
It could be
artificially delayed by some amount of time. So the time to close has gone down significantly. But enough salespeople are doing this. It's probably artificially deflating these numbers.
Yes.
So real close rates might take a year, but the sales team might wait a quarter or two, so it looks like it's 6 months.
In any company, that's something that can happen, right? Wow. You can definitely delay it, but that's just another factor of it, right? Let's say we're a Bit Discovery, right? Or we'd say we were a White Hat, or whatever company we were. Was it a 3-month sales cycle, or did you talk to that person and close 3 other sales cycles where it was really 2 years, but you closed the last sales cycle in 3 months, right? Or did you artificially keep that around longer, right? Mm-hmm. So I think in the end, it comes back to the way you manage your pipeline, right? Hey, if the deal is not qualified, you close it right away. Okay, well, that's how we do the pipeline. And then you're seeing, and then it's kind of self-evident of that, right? Or do you have these long sales cycles, but you only have one of them, right? And we say, hey, if you're working it, keep it in an opportunity. It just depends on how the guy wants to do it.
Wow. Okay. What about how you feel about dev? Like, how's your relationship with dev going? Is that a love-hate relationship as well?
Yeah.
Seems like sales makes a lot of friends.
Not
internally, but externally.
So more on how we did do it. It's always more helpful if you're on the page. Lex and I were always on the kind of the same page of what we're...
Lex being the VP of engineering.
We're always on the same page, and the engineer's highly, highly competent, right? So you don't have anything like that. But
there's still product features that aren't being done on time or in the way the customers want it or whatever.
It is, yes, because you're the first to die, right? Like, you're going to get shot first for the numbers being bad, but it might be a product problem, right? Mm-hmm. Even if it is a product problem, you're still on the same quote. It doesn't matter that there's something wrong, or in the middle of your demo, it just froze, or the whole thing collapsed, right? Whatever it is. And so the biggest frustration whenever you're dealing with that is that they don't feel the pain. They're not up on stage talking to 50 people giving this demo, or 20, or in a closing motion when something craps out, or when some feature is not available that you have said over and over again that you need it. Mm-hmm. And to their credit, well, maybe if you gave them the right funding, that would happen. Or maybe if you gave them the right this or that.
One less dinner.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, you just want to make sure they feel that this just happened and it is important. And this isn't just another complaint. This is really hard to get a lead. It's really hard to get at this point, and we didn't win it because of this. And I'm sure they want you to feel that they've been working for 12 hours on this, thinking about this code at night, doing that. So, if you have competent dev people that are really focused and good, it should be a good relationship there.
So on the flip side, and I actually really straddle the fence on this one. I totally see both sides' perspective. I've done a lot of enterprise deals back when I was a consultant and helped out on a lot of deals as well. But from the engineering side, oftentimes sales, not you specifically, but in general, will come back with some objection. And quite often, I would say not 100% of the time, obviously, but very often, this is a faster horses situation. They want something dumb, and it's like that. We're not going to build this terrible idea. It's just not a good idea. We've got so many better ideas in the pipeline. We can go do something that would actually really help them as opposed to what they say that they want. And so it's this weird juggling of, obviously we don't want to make you look bad as a salesperson, but obviously we're not going to waste a whole bunch of development resources on something that isn't going to move the needle for the rest of the customers.
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile that on your side?
At that,
is it a bigger picture sort of situation? Are you willing to overlook this one loss?
Yeah, totally. Always, right? Always the bigger picture matters, but that leader generally of the company, like we're running BitDiscovery, that CEO needs to know exactly what we're doing. Mm-hmm. We are missing out on X million of revenue because of this feature. And we are making a bet, because it's still a bet. It's still theoretical.
Of course.
And I, a lot of times, agree with those, right? That we're going to get 10x that by building this feature. I'll make that with it, but let's all be on the same page, because, again, it's a company's quota, but it's my quota first, right? It's my responsibility to bring it in first. So now I got to figure out some way to sell it without those features. And recognize that that's
maybe
difficult.
It's just promising that there's going to be a better feature or something else.
Yeah. A lot of times that's what it is. You don't want to get into like selling futures too much, but you're as a small company, like your ability to innovate and be very well thought out is more important than any one feature you have, because that's trust in the future of it. As you get into, the bigger and bigger companies, you don't have that influence, right? Mm-hmm. You don't have influence, like I'm sure maybe you do it. IBM, I'm thinking IBM, Apple, like these kinds of companies. Like, can a single salesperson influence the product life cycle? Can they change a quota? They can't change a quota. So they don't have the power to sell around that, even though their quota is the same. Yet they have, they're Apple, right? So it's a lot easier, or Amazon, whatever it is.
So you said something interesting just there, selling what's on the back of the truck versus not. Like, why wouldn't you promise the world, since it's going to make your quota? Is it purely a relationship?
Lying. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a long-term relationship that you're trying to build, and if they detect you lying now, they won't deal with you down the road.
It's a lot of reason not to lie in general, right?
Sure, of course.
But
I'm not advocating.
Yeah. No. I know. Why would you not? So some people will. You want to...
Well, first of all, I'm not sure it is lying, because it might be coming.
Yeah.
It might be coming in 2 quarters or 3 quarters.
It may change, right? We're going to do... This is the vision of it, right? This is what we have planned. This is the evidence of plan. If you can show the mock-ups of that, that's something too. And this is where we need to go. Is that future more important to you as a customer than having just something there today, right? Is something really good down the road that's going to be game-changing more important than me just pushing that in there today? I'm not, they make that decision, right? They make it like I'm telling them the benefits of each, right? They can make either one. It depends where they want to put the stock in,
Okay, so that sounds like it could be a renewal problem. So let's talk about renewals.
Yes, that turns into a renewal.
So there's a difference between selling the product and making the renewal. So a lot of things are renewal problems, not sales problems. So you can sell today, but you're not going to get the renewal. So how do you think about renewals in general?
Well, it depends again on what your job is at the company, especially if you're in enterprise sales or if you're managing sales or if you're where we are. Where we were at our old company, I had the same compensation for renewals as I did for new business. So you make sure you get those in, like 100%. Those need to come in. They're 100% your job, right? There is nobody else to do that. There's no one to shift blame. So you need to continuously be talking to them even after the sale. The sale never ends, right? And that way you should think of it as you don't end a sale. At other companies, you'll have new business reps, right? And you'll have renewal reps, or, sometimes they're CSMs, sometimes they're inside sales reps, whoever they may be. So if you're a new business rep, your job as an enterprise salesperson is to close that deal as fast as you can for as much as you can, right? Whatever the value is. That relationship will be there for upsells, which generally you'll get paid the same rate on. So you need to be very responsive to that customer, right? And also it's just good in general to, if you sell a customer something, to maintain that relationship. It's just, even if it's not structured like that, it's kind of important, even outside of that world. But then it gets turned over to an inside sales rep or, some type of territory manager or whatever. And that person, or CSM, that person is responsible for the renewal. And so you can kind of forget about that and keep going after new business. It just depends on how a company wants to structure that.
And would you say certain people are better at the renewal?
Yeah.
They're just, what makes someone good at a renewal versus good at in the first sale?
Well, you don't have to constantly be adding value and talking and doing all this. You can be much more responsive to them. So they have, what are the issues? What outstanding support tickets do you have? How do we handle that? They'll write down, okay, I'm going to get back to you on this, this, and this. Where if you talk to a salesperson about some support ticket, they're on to the next meeting. They got to make a quota. If it's not directly related, they're not going to follow up on it. Mm-hmm. And in general, it's not their job. So better listeners in some regard, right? When it comes to the customer's issues, better at communicating internally, more regimented when it comes to that customer, as opposed to like a salesperson. That's, again, we're blurring the lines of,
sure,
because there's farmer sales reps that kind of handle that too. They generally are a lot slower, right? Not slower is a bad thing, but slower, more comprehensive with the customer. And that's what leads to sometimes larger deals.
And upsells as well.
In upsells, yeah, exactly. But that will make for, a lot of times it can make for a bad new business rep, because the new business reps need to be moving quick, generating this, just need to be a little more tuned in on the tech and a little more aggressive.
Interesting. That's a good distinction. So there's going to be a lot of people listening who are just going to start companies. What sort of kind of cautionary tales would you tell them about the kinds of people or the types of contracts they should be building with sales? Because I've heard a lot of horror stories, I don't know if you have, about games that have been played that have really, really sunk companies, like even very, very large companies, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. So I was talking to a company through one of the board members a while ago about this. They need to be very, very careful who the first people they hire is, especially in sales and especially a sales leader, right? Think more in terms of experience than intelligence necessarily. And I'm talking about intelligence like book smarts, right? Knowing all these fundamentals. You're at a small company.
You talked about it a little bit, but what about like defining quotas? Like where would you say, like, are there ways in which that you've seen that quotas are designed that are just disastrous for companies? Because I sure have. I can give you an example just to get your brain going. So I ran into this company years ago, and they had a quota system that basically said that any new business that's booked is when they get paid. So what they did is they went around and had a whole bunch of their friends book an insane amount of business through shell companies, like enormous amount of money. And none of those companies ever actually paid any money, but it didn't matter because the rep was comped on the close of business, not on the close of revenue actually hitting bank accounts.
Yeah.
So there's little gotchas in there that are really slippery.
Yeah, that's very specific form of fraud.
Yeah,
right?
it sure is. But they got away with it for years. They were making a lot of money.
Okay. Well, I would think, your salespeople won't like it, but I'll tell you, I signed up for it. Is that I got paid when we got paid as a customer, right? So I think that's good. I think giving the first salespeople you have the ability to define their own quota is good as well. What do you want to sign up for? Putting it on them, to giving them all the information and getting them to get the first step.
So so they pick a very large quota, pick a very small quota. What's the delta from their perspective? Or how does the company perceive that? Because they still have to pay a certain amount of money.
Yeah.
They're so comped at some low level, they could just leave and never show up again.
Yeah, you got bigger problems if you can't pick out the person, right? Like the quota comes second. You got to be like, I was able to kind of set my own quota a little bit.
Sure.
But it was reasonable. I'm not trying to screw the company, and, I have stock in the company. And so a lot of that, your compensation structure will eliminate that, right? your vetting process.
How so? That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. So more equity, right? The equity payout is the main payout. Your base is to keep you alive when the commissions don't come in. When the commissions do come in, you should be very happy to be where you're at, right? Mm-hmm. If you make that all kind of in a line and you think about each of those things, I think it should work out.
That's it?
It's hard to get so detailed in it, right? If you give a guy two to 5%, give your VP of sales 2 to 5% of the company in equity, right? Think in between those lines. Any less, it's ridiculous. Any more, they're doing more than sales, right? So make sure you define if they're just doing sales 2 to 5%. If they're doing more than anything, marketing, and they're responsible for BizDev or whatever, give them a little bit more, right? That will keep them in the company. That will keep them invested. Have quarterly vesting options for them. Even consider giving them a certain amount of stock. If they're that good, if you want to attract good talent, give them it for the first year guaranteed, because they're committing that first year to you too. Sure. And especially if you can't,
it won't close. No business is going to close in the first couple quarters while they're figuring things out anyway.
Yeah. I mean, for us, it was different. We closed one of our biggest deal 4 months in. But yeah, it's a little bit different there. So yeah.
But typically.
Yeah, I wouldn't sign on. Had I have not known you guys and worked with you guys and had all the structure and not known the space, I would never have taken some of the concessions I've took. Mm-hmm. But I knew where it was going, right?
Sure. So
if you're a company and you don't know that person and everything's off, consider giving a percentage of the company to them after their first year, sure. Right? 1% or whatever it is, right? Outside of that, I would recommend you give them a little higher of a split. Like for your base, make it to like 70% because they're not going to make the first amount too long, and then give them 30%
because it takes a while for that first sales cycle to go through.
Yeah, and they're doing it all on their own, right?
It's all a big bet for them.
Starting from scratch, yeah, and they're really doing it for the equity, but you gotta kind of grease the wheels there.
Sure.
And then make sure you have your renewal structure very well put together. Who's handling support? Who's handling that? At what point do you hire those people? Because if you have somebody that's expecting to only do sales and now you're going to throw support at them, they can't do sales when they're doing support. And if they're doing BizDev, they can't do BizDev when they're doing it. So that's where that equity is going to come in. If you're going to need to go higher on that, if you're going to keep them doing multiple jobs.
That's a great answer. All right. So what about now talking about the management in terms of the things that they get wrong? So one I can think of off the top of my head was chasing people who haven't given a no, but it's clear that it's not going to happen. And these people, like, you can just sense that it's just one of those things where they just want to be taken out to dinner one more time. They just want another free flight out to Bermuda or whatever. And instead of just saying, just cut them off, stop talking to them. Like, why are we wasting another cent on this?
That's different. So I've been like really fortunate to have really good managers. Like, really have an awesome manager now. I've had like 4 SVPs that have been fantastic. So I haven't had like a lot of bad experiences in this. I've had like one bad middle manager, 1 to 2 of those. Mm-hmm. And by bad, I mean like falling asleep in meetings bad, like very, very bad.
Literally falling asleep in the meeting.
In a major institution, right? In a major company.
Were they snoring?
No, not snoring. Just head down, falling asleep when they weren't talking.
It was just deep in thought. You never know.
Man, I wish I could even tell the organization because it's almost at a different level. But perplexing. Talking about people that weren't even there. Talking almost like delusional, right? And this is just the start of it. On the other hand,
drugs are bad. Okay.
That guy gave me some of the best advice I've ever heard. Right. Huh. So,
which was what, out of curiosity?
Which was, you're too hungry for deals. Like, you want these things too bad. You're working too hard. Thought he's an idiot. It's like, who doesn't want someone that works hard? But he's absolutely right. I was working too hard on things and not letting them kind of come to me, kind of being a little more reactive.
So is it a lot like fishing where if you like just try to yank it in, you're going to break the line kind of deal?
Yeah. And I wasn't even doing that. This was a very specific, thing, but yeah, a lot of I almost think it's more intentional, like more like mental, where you don't feel the need to do that. I think the best salespeople that I try to emulate the most are the ones that have it all together, like up in their head. They're calm. They have everything's in their life is in the right portion. And when they talk to you, it feels like they're just talking to you. You can hear them on the phone. We got this new company we're at. We have some that are so good at this. I listen to them on there and want to emulate that. They just have their life really well balanced and their intentions well balanced. What they say comes secondary to how they make these people feel. And they're honest. They're so honest, right? You can just get a feeling that they really care if that person gets what they bought. They really care about helping that person. And of course, they're some of the best salespeople, right? So it's interesting.
All right. So are there customers that you should fire?
Yeah,
you're talking
absolutely.
to them. I mean, beyond they're just delaying the sale forever.
Yeah.
But like they're a plague on this company.
Yeah. There are definitely customers you should fire.
What do they look like? What's their makeup? Can you see it early?
Oh yeah.
That would be a nice one to know.
See right away. It's not always the biggest company. Sometimes it's the smallest ones. A lot of times they stand the most to lose and they don't understand enough and they're draining the company's resources. If you're an individual,
how do you know that they're doing that? In what way?
Because they do not care about what else you have to do, right? They need responses immediately and you haven't signed them up for that, right? If you have signed them up, then it's warranted. If the product's broken or something's a problem, then yeah, they should be coming to you. But they are always trying to work one over on you. It would be like having like a frenemy, right? It would be the exact same thing where they are looking to stab you in the back at the first chance they get, but there's still something binding you together, right? So those are the ones you should watch out for. They're draining the company's resources. They're draining your resources. They just don't give a shit, right? A lot of it depends on the margins you're making on it. So you have to know stuff about that on the back end. And generally, if regional sales manager, enterprise sales, you're not going to know all that. So it doesn't matter as much.
Because you could be making it up. Development costs may not cost as much as you think. And so the margin still might be very good.
Yeah.
So it's not worth firing them yet. But if things get worse, maybe.
Yes.
Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And, to come back to your point about where have I seen it gone wrong with some sales managers, when they approach it like you're not dealing with customers and you're on an assembly line and you're just pushing them to the next stage. It's just a box you're moving over and things don't work like that. Some people who get into middle management will be complete failures as reps, right? They'll have totally failed their way out, but rule with an iron fist, you're going to do this. And every sales rep that's worth anything is going to realize that. And that's where they're going to have issues, right? But that's going to be your rough sales managers you got to do something about.
Gotcha. Okay. So to me, sales doesn't speak to me at all. I don't enjoy doing it. I have done quite a bit of it with you and on my own, and it doesn't speak to me. But I think part of it is because I find it very demoralizing. Very, as you said, you just can't have any ego at all in sales. You just got to just swallow it and just take the abuse, for lack of a better term, and just go for it. So how do you stay motivated? How do you just kind of get up in the morning and decide you're going to take another day of this? I mean, I'm not trying to put a gun to your head on this one, but like, how do you do it? Like, how do you overcome that?
Well, I think it's kind of good for you in a way. It's good for you to experience loss, right? You get older. Like, I was used to like sports games. I'm used to, I'm not used to losing in sports games. I can lose sometimes though. And it's not the end of the world. You play the next game and you play the next game. And so I feel like as you get older, you experience less apparent losses, right? Like, I'm doing well. I bought a house and I'm keep going up and I got this and this. So I just got a boat, right? But you're not really competing, right? Like this is a gravy train of a world we're living in, right? And if you got to do a lot of work, but you start out pretty good, you can put yourself in a good position. So it's really providing you a real look at the world and a real look at how valuable you are to the rest of it. So this is a good shot to the ego that needs to happen, right? And if you think of yourself as too good, it's, sales is a good way to kind of bring you back down there. You stay motivated by one, you can make more money generally in sales if you're doing it right.
Yeah, but there's lots of ways to make money.
Totally. It comes at a cost. Yeah, but it's not free.
Yeah, it isn't. Yeah. But this seems extraordinarily taxing on you as a person. So I'm like, how do you pump yourself up? How do you get out of that?
Well, you don't want to get, I think early on when you start sales, you will do the motivational videos and try to boost that ego up so you're not scared or you're not nervous or you're not feeling that out, feeling so bad later. I guess it's just something you have to kind of put out of your mind, right? You don't think about it. You're generally going to make more money in it in the future, and you're resilient to people's thoughts, right? Like people don't hold these, like you kind of have to stop thinking about what people think so much, right? They don't really think everything negative you think. And you know what? You're just doing a job, and you don't like salespeople generally either. You don't want someone knocking on your door. I can't stand it. But I mean,
you'll buy it anyway, though.
Yeah, sometimes I will. I like to hear a good pitch, like about a bunch of shit, because I just like hearing this good pitch. And you like to hear what they have to offer. Like maybe I'll learn something and that'll be worth it. Mm-hmm. And so you just respect people in different ways after that. I think like as you get more like tenured in sales, you are actually happy with it, right? Like you're actually, okay, this is a really... Is
it like jumping out of airplane? Is it an adrenaline rush? Is that what's happening?
I mean, there should be a little bit of adrenaline, but there should just be more understanding. Like I could talk about like some of these guys you see do it real well. The guy was one of my bosses. You know him real well. Super admire this guy because people will speak emotionally. Emotions in sales get so high, and they'll talk negatively toward him. Okay, always the higher road. Not much to say about it, right? And if you've ever done that, like you feel pretty bad about yourself the next day, like, oh shit, I fucked up. I kind of went off on this like forecast call and I shouldn't have. Wow, this is why this is a leader, and I'm not in that person's position. And this gets super successful too. So, so that's the kind of quality person you'll be. And I think that higher quality people they generally do pretty successfully. There's a lot of fraudsters out there, right?
Of course.
But you find people that are doing it right have a kind of rapport with everyone around them that they just, they're just doing it right. They're doing a lot of stuff. If they can get sales right, they're doing other things in their life generally.
So if you're to look at like a 15, 16, 17-year-old kid and say,
don't do it. Don't ever go into sales. Ever.
No, but what would you say are the hallmarks of someone who would be good at sales if they so chose such a terrible profession?
Yeah. No, it's good, but you should love challenges, right?
You're right, kids, don't do sales.
Yeah, don't do sales. You should enjoy, you should really enjoy processes, right? Like if you like to do difficult things that you may not feel like you can do and have fun in that process, then it would be something for you. If you're internally driven, like your motor is pretty high and you got to be doing a lot of stuff anyway and keep the mind occupied, you're probably going to be pretty good at it, right?
So is it ADHD? Is that's
a good, a lot of salespeople have
ADHD. Sociopath?
I don't know about sociopath, but depending on what kind of sales you're doing, right? Like
sales,
investment banking, right? It might be right up your alley.
Podcast producers.
Podcast, yeah, there we go. So it can be right on when it comes to that, but I think you don't have to be charismatic. You don't have to be extroverted. A lot of
I think most people would be shocked, but to hear that.
They are shocked. And this is the same people who are saying, like, you got to close the sale. And they have Alec Baldwin, Gary, Glenn Ross, or, pick a boiler room. That's not a lot of sales. Like, the best salespeople I know are slightly introverted, right? They're better listeners than talkers. You just want to do things for them, right? There's got the current companies, he's asking, he just on a call with him, he's asking for someone's commitment onto something. And I found myself just wanting to say, yes, yeah, I'll help you. Just they're like kind of good people, and they know the product, and everything they're doing is in line of good business, and it feels good to do good business, right? Because the money, like if you're doing it just for the money, you buy something and it just goes away right away. Like, I mean, how you bought a new car, right? You bought that BMW.
That's because you keep buying Bitcoin. That's why it keeps going
away.
Yeah,
I did get a little of that, but like how fast did that BMW go away? And you're like, oh, kind of want a new one, or now it's not so new anymore. Like all those things kind of go away, but you keep really good business relationships, and it's almost like having a friendship where you have it's like being on a sports team, almost like you have a goal. Your goal is the same. You have something to communicate with someone that you would never talk to way on the other side of the world or on the other side of the country. And all these incentives are aligned for both of you to do this, and everyone kind of benefits from it.
Okay, so my final question would be, well, I'm a young man trying to get into sales, and I'm interested in everything you're saying, Kyle. How do I do it? There's a lot of people listening saying, well, that sounds like a pretty interesting life. You get to travel, talk to a lot of people, make a lot of money. How would you start out?
I would first say, why do you want to go into sales? Because
I just said why I want to go into sales, more money, travel, meet interesting people.
Well, sure. And how important is that to you? Because there's a cost to everything, right? There's a cost to what you're about to embark on. It will affect different parts of your life, and you're going to have to structure your life so that it impacts that.
What do you mean by that?
You, depending on the sales you're kind of trying to do, you may have to have a very quiet house, right? That will cause tension with your family, right? You may have calls that come in at 11 o'clock at night. That may not be good for your mental health, right? You may need to travel a couple days a week if you want to do that.
Or more.
Yeah, or you're all these nice dinners you're having, like you're going to get gout pretty quick there if you can't moderate yourself. So if you don't go in with a self-discipline that's important, you're going to come out of there dying by the time you're 45, right, or 50. Like it's too conducive, not only the money, but the way you handle like the successes and how it brings your ego up in different environments and what you can do with that, you can handle it very poorly, right? So if you don't have a self-discipline to handle that going into it, it can be very destructive on your lifestyle. So you want to have that down, and then you want to make sure you're doing it, I think, at least for me, for a very good kind of moral reason, right? You want to have sell something of value to somebody that needs it and be able to correctly articulate a very complex problem in a very tough environment, right? And that's the value of it. Those other things you get because of it are just how well you do that, right?
I really like that answer. You're sort of like in this austere, sort of almost war-torn environment, trying to cross the finish line with the critical piece of material that's going to save the war. And if it weren't for you, I mean, engineers, yeah, they built the machine or whatever, but you got to get it across the line. Like,
I try not to compare anything to war, especially if you're flying first class to open a $2,000 bottle of wine for a client, but it very much is
it feels like that though. You are deep in the weeds.
The pressure is there, right? Enormous. Like, because like I told my wife, like, yeah, I ate at this steakhouse, like all these famous places, and we had a $5,000, $10,000 dinner, best steak in Vegas, best this. You know how much of it I remember tasting? Like none of it. That $2,000 bottle of wine, I'm I'm not sitting there sipping on it, wishing it around my mouth. I'm trying to work on a deal because I just expensed $10,000 for this dinner and all these flights and all this, whatever football game. Well, now something has to come from that, right? So I don't remember tasting any of these things. I don't remember enjoying like a lot of these things because you're there doing a job, right? Maybe for the client, they're enjoying it, right? But, for me, it's different.
Yeah, I get that because when I'm traveling, it's hotels, it's airports, it's a conference center, and it's a couple of kind of chain-ish restaurants near wherever the convention center is that I'm at. And that's my experience of traveling to tons of different countries and locations and whatever. And people are like, oh, you've been all these crazy places. And I'm like, it could have been down the street. I mean, I would not have known the difference. I mean, maybe the signs look a little different, the people look a little different, but that's about it.
Yeah. I mean, I remember forgetting what city I was in, right? Like when I was younger, like 25, 26, like when we're traveling, I spent half of Thanksgiving in Kansas City, right? When I had to go for that day, I had to be there 3 days a week for like a couple months because to make sure we close this thing, and love the people there, awesome. But, you wake up and you're like, I'm in Kansas City on Thanksgiving morning. What am I doing here? Right. Sure, I get home and everything, but you sacrifice those little things, or I can't join this like sports recreational league, or I can't go hang out with my buddies because of this. And that's, there's a lot of hyperbole because it's really not that bad.
So you'd say the major takeaway you'd give someone starting off is your life is going to be dedicated to this. You might also have a family, but you're not going to be able to do the things a normal person would be doing in that job of being a family member. You're going to be doing this other job of going and getting breadwinning or whatever.
You can do it well, right? You can do it both well, but you have to be very disciplined and structured in how you manage stress and how you manage this looming number and you being fired constantly over it.
And also manage your own household and expectations.
And manage what you're able to give and when your work hours are, right? Because sometimes you're able to, take some time off in the middle of the day, but then you're not even gone, but you're in your own head because you got to figure out how to pull this thing together from 5 to 7 o'clock or 11 to midnight or, whatever the time is. So you'll have off time, but you'll be on time and you're technically always on because your quota doesn't change. You take vacation, you're not off quota.
Yeah, I find this is actually a big point of contention between a number of people I know, including myself, who travel quite a bit. Traveling is always seen by the significant other as this exotic whatever because they're not on it, and you get back and they want to go to nice dinners. You're like, oh, I literally just came from 8 of those. Can we just sit at home and relax? And from their perspective, it's like, yo, you're just kind of a bump in the log,
Yeah.
Like, no, that's not what's going on here. Like home is actually very different. It's almost rare.
Yeah. I mean, exhausting. I mean, it's a little different now with all this Zoom stuff, right? It's a little bit.
COVID has changed a lot of that.
It's more like that.
It'll change back though. I have a feeling.
Yeah, totally. And some of that's the fun of sales, right? To go meet, be in front of your customers and go to those events. It's a lot better than doing demos on Zoom and getting into real technical conversations and things like that. But yeah, it's tough mentally. You have to be able to check out. And sometimes that takes a process. So you have to be able to, you need to set you have to set very firm boundaries because to everyone else, you talk to any of my friends and like, what am I doing? Oh, he's in this city at Smith and Walensky's doing this dinner, right? It sounds good. And it sounds good at the end of the day, but probably a lot of them know it by now, but there's a bad cost to that too. You get into thinking too much, right? You get into reading too many signs on people and you get to like getting really in depth on how you break problems down. And even like keeping up a healthy ego about different things. So
become too intense.
Very much too intense. Yeah. So you gotta shut it off in your personal life and be, who you normally are.
Gotcha. All right, Kyle. Well, how do people find you? How do they talk to you if they want to reach out?
They don't. Hopefully they never find me and they never see me again.
All these people are definitely gonna want to reach out.
How do they find me? Maybe we'll put an email in here on the link.
Okay.
Not on any social media, specifically for that. But Yeah, if you search,
What if they want to buy your product? They can't find you.
They want to buy my product. Yeah. You can find me on LinkedIn and send me a message.
Okay,
here.
all right, sounds good. Well, thanks for coming on, Kyle. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, great talk.